Hello, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, August 28th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, John Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 327 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with Steven Salaita, professor at the American University of Cairo, to talk about if and how Palestinians should engage with American politics. Later on in the program, John will take us through the latest resistance news from southern Gaza and the Netzarim corridor, as well as Hezbollah's retaliatory strike on key military bases in Israel. But first, here's a summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza and the West Bank. And we'll also share some reportage highlights from the Electronic Intifada's contributors there. Israel is tightening the noose around Palestinians by forcibly transferring them into an increasingly narrow area no more than 10% of the Gaza Strip. Even before the war, the Gaza Strip was one of the most densely populated places in the world, with 2.3 million Palestinians, 2/3 of them refugees from areas conquered by Zionist forces in 1948, concentrated in 141 square miles. Since October, 2% of Gaza's population has been killed, injured, or gone missing, but nearly everyone has been displaced, many multiple times. The government media office in Gaza published a timeline demonstrating how Israeli evacuation orders beginning in November have forced Palestinians from the north of the territory to the south under the threat of death, pushing much of the population to a so-called humanitarian zone along the coast of southern Gaza. Since August 16th, the Israeli army has issued at least 5 evacuation orders directing Palestinians in central Gaza, primarily in the town of Deir Balah, to flee to an ever-shrinking area of the Gaza Strip. On Sunday, patients, staff, and displaced families inside and around the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir Balah picked up what they could and fled. Dr. Mohammed Al-Najjar, a doctor in the intensive care unit at the hospital, posted this photo of himself in the ICU on Sunday, saying that this was the last photo of the unit and that patients will be left to inevitably die as there are no doctors or nurses. He added, quote, "Please, anyone who can see this post, do anything to stop this genocide. I will not leave the hospital." Physicians caring for premature newborn babies in the hospital had to delicately evacuate them to nearby medical facilities that have been bombed, besieged, and attacked by Israeli forces over the last 10 months and rebuilt to be at least partially functional by Palestinians. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza stated on Monday that despite the panic that Israel's order caused among patients who were fearful that Israel would repeat the procedure of storming and attacking Al-Aqsa Hospital, as it has done to every other hospital in Gaza, the ministry would continue to operate, and that there were still approximately 100 patients inside the hospital, 7 of whom were in intensive care. 3 leading Palestinian rights groups, Al-Haq, the Mizan Center for Human Rights, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, stated on Tuesday that along with the 5 displacement orders over the last 2 weeks in central Gaza, Israel has issued 9 other orders, quote, targeting various areas of Khan Yunis, and an additional 4 orders for southern Gaza. Samir Zakut, Al-Mizan's deputy director, who is displaced in central Gaza, stated, quote, Israel's continued cycle of forced displacement has left the people of Gaza with nowhere to go. The so-called safe humanitarian area, which is neither safe nor humanitarian, covers only about 11% of Gaza. There is no space left for new tents, and some people have been displaced up to 15 times. Additionally, there is no transportation available to move around. People are in a state of panic and fear, unsure of what to do or where to go. We are all waiting for the next displacement order, wondering when it will come and where people will be forced to go next. The rights groups say that the recent displacement orders in and around Deir Balah are having a devastating impact on humanitarian operations on the ground. Following the Israeli displacement order affecting Rafah in May, the groups add most UN agencies and international NGOs relocated their operational centers and staff to Deir al-Balah. Consequently, the UN and various international NGOs were forced to vacate their operational centers, significantly disrupting their ability to provide essential support and services on the ground from Deir al-Balah. The UN announced on Monday that it was being forced to halt all of its humanitarian aid operations in Gaza because of the displacement orders. Speaking on condition of anonymity, a senior UN official told the Reuters news agency that, quote, "We're unable to deliver today with the conditions that we're in. We're not leaving Gaza because the people need us there. We're trying to balance the need of the population with the need for safety and security of the UN personnel. Where do we move now?" The official told Reuters that UN staff had to be moved so quickly that equipment was left behind. This comes as the UN prepares to vaccinate 640,000 Palestinian children against the polio virus, which has already paralyzed a 10-month-old baby, the first case in 25 years. The aforementioned Palestinian human rights groups say that, quote, "over 1 million children are at risk of contracting polio. The delay in the vaccination campaign due to Israel's displacement orders highlights a trend of weaponizing previously eradicated, highly infectious diseases as a tool of genocide. This strategy deliberately uses such diseases to inflict permanent disability or death on Palestinian residents of Gaza." Meanwhile, Israeli forces attacked areas across the Gaza Strip this past week, including in Gaza City in the north, Deir al-Balah, Nuseirat and Bureij refugee camps in the center, and Al-Mawasi and Khan Yunis in the south. Early this morning, Israeli forces also attacked the Jabalia refugee camp in the north, targeting homes while people were sleeping. Images and video on social media, which I will not display here, show children once again torn to shreds. During and since Sunday's displacement orders on Deir al-Balah, Israeli airstrikes, tanks, and armed drones have continuously attacked people in the city. Our contributor Abu Bakr Abed said on Tuesday that along with airstrikes, Israeli tanks and bulldozers have been destroying and demolishing homes in the eastern part of the city for days. Due to the ongoing military operations, about 85% of the water wells in Deir al-Balah are non-functional, according to the UN, making it harder for people to meet their basic needs. This past week, Abu Bakr wrote a piece for the Electronic Intifada about the killing of a teenager by an Israeli sniper in February. I'll read from that now. Quote, "Abdul-Karim Omar al-Ramlawi had just turned 18 years old. He always dressed well in jeans and jackets, and he dreamed of going to university to study mechatronics. He loved riding motorcycles and playing and watching soccer. He supported Real Madrid and considered his favorite player to be Luka Modric, a legend of the game, and would frequently praise him. He was also a pet lover, especially cats. At school, he told jokes to his classmates and studied during breaks. After school, he helped his father at the nylon factory and would run errands for his mother. He loved befriending and helping all," said Hassan al-Ramlawi, Abdul Karim's cousin. "He was so ambitious and passionate. Everybody cherished him." In February, the family lived through 12 days of relentless attacks by Israeli occupation forces in their rental home in West Gaza City. "Our days were filled with panic and death," said Khalil, Abdul Karim's brother. "Drones buzzed over our heads, Israeli tanks relentlessly bombed around us, and F-16 warplanes randomly leveled houses. Amid these 12 days of Israeli attacks, the morning of February 8th was especially bleak and freezing." Khalil recalls that him and Abdul Karim had woken up early for Fajr, or dawn prayers, in their home. Afterward, around 9 a.m., Khalil said, Abdul Karim approached a window. "He wanted to look from the window to see if the Israeli forces withdrew or not," said Khalil. "Once he approached the window, a sniper on a tank shot him. 2 bullets pierced his chest and head. As he was taking his final breaths, he raised his finger and pointed to me to tell me not to come over. Khalil took cover from the sniper's bullets, but the sniper kept firing. The sniper was shooting him for fun," he said. "There was like a blood fountain around him. Hours passed, and each time the family tried to go to Abdul Karim, Israeli snipers would fire their weapons. As my younger brother Ahmed and I got close to pull him in, a bomb blew up the room and a bullet hit Abdul Karim's chest again, he said. Minutes later, a quadcopter came to make sure he was killed. Even though he was clearly dead, the quadcopter shot his corpse nonstop. That's from Abu Bakr Abed's latest feature, The Sniper Was Shooting Him for Fun, on electronicintifada.net. Israel has killed at least 3 more journalists this week in Gaza. The Gaza government media office stated on Tuesday that reporter Ali Naif Taima was killed on Tuesday in an airstrike on Al-Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis. Reporter Hussam al-Dabaka was killed last Thursday, along with his wife and children, when Israel bombed their home in the Maghazi refugee camp. And early this morning, Israel killed journalist Mohammed Abdrabo in a bombing of a residential building in Nuseirat camp in the central Gaza Strip. More than 170 Palestinian journalists have been killed by Israel since October. Human Rights Watch published a report this week documenting the systematic torture and abuse of Palestinian healthcare workers in Gaza since October. According to the group, released doctors, nurses, and paramedics described to Human Rights Watch their mistreatment in Israeli custody, including humiliation, beatings, forced stress positions, prolonged cuffing and blindfolding, and denial of medical care. They also reported torture, including rape and sexual abuse by Israeli forces, denial of medical care, and poor detention conditions for the general detainee population. After being taken from Gaza, the health workers told Human Rights Watch that they were then deported to detention facilities in Israel, including the Sde Teiman military base in the Negev Desert and Ashkelon prison, or forcibly transferred to the Anatot military base near East Jerusalem and the Ofer detention facility in the occupied West Bank. Quote, all said that they were stripped, beaten, and blindfolded and handcuffed for many weeks on end and pressured to confess to being members of the Hamas movement with various threats of indefinite detention, rape, and killing their families in Gaza. One paramedic said that when soldiers removed his blindfold at the Sde Teiman facility, he saw that he was in a large building like a warehouse with chains hanging from the ceiling. Dozens of detainees in diapers were suspended from the ceiling with the chains attached to their square metal handcuffs. He said that personnel at the facility then suspended him from a chain so his feet were not touching the ground, dressed him in a garment and a headband that were attached to wires, and shocked him with electricity. My colleague Tamara Nassar will be publishing an extensive report on the systemic torture inflicted on Palestinians inside Israeli prisons and concentration camps. Please look out for that this week on electronicintifada.net. Turning to the occupied West Bank, Israeli settlers killed 37-year-old Khalil Salim Ziada and injured at least 6 other Palestinians during a pogrom targeting the village of Wadi Rahal near Bethlehem on Monday night. It was one of several settler pogroms this week. The Wafa news agency reported that Israeli settlers assaulted Palestinian farmers in Al-Maniya village, also near Bethlehem, on Tuesday. The head of the village council said that approximately 150 armed Israeli settlers attacked the farmers and opened fire on them. Later on in the evening, a Palestinian man was injured in an attack by Israeli settlers south of Nablus. Wafa news agency says that settlers pelted Palestinian cars with stones close to a checkpoint, hitting a man in the head. On Monday, Israeli forces using an armed drone struck a house and killed 5 Palestinians, including 2 children, in the Nur Shams refugee camp near Tulkarem. And in the pre-dawn hours of this morning, the Israeli army launched a wide-scale military offensive across the northern West Bank, targeting areas of resistance in Jenin, Tubas, and Tulkarem. As of this report, at least 10 Palestinians have been reported killed since the raids began early on Wednesday. Wafa news agency reports that Palestinian fighters were assassinated in Jenin and 2 others were killed and several others were injured following a drone strike by Israeli occupation forces on the Fara'a refugee camp south of Tubas. Israeli forces have been preventing ambulances from accessing wounded people and obstructing rescue operations. The Palestine Red Crescent Society stated earlier today that Israeli forces also detained medical teams in Farah camp and prevented them from using communication devices. They also fired shots inside the medical point and assaulted the director of the Tubas Emergency Center, the medical group stated. And in Jenin, the Jenin Governmental Hospital was blocked by Israeli soldiers, preventing medical teams and ambulances from entering and or leaving the hospital. And finally, we wanted to bring you some images and videos from journalists and others in Gaza that highlight the resilience, joy, and determination of the Palestinian people. Journalist Hossam Shabat, who is still reporting from the north of Gaza, posted this video of an initiative he's part of to build and distribute small carts to sell food or other essentials in order for people to support their families. And members of the Gaza Sunbirds paracycling team shot this video of their new project in a camp for displaced people. They say, quote, "Welcome to our humble barbershop. Hygiene has been tough recently with little water, no soap, and no chances for a trim, but we were able to set up a pop-up barbershop in our camp. We try our best to cherish joyous moments together whenever we can." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. Thank you for that report. And, you know, there's so much that what's in is so heavy and so hard to watch, but also we can't include everything. And there is so much going on. But I hope that for people, that is just kind of a good roundup of really some of the main things to know. And wow.
Yeah, I mean, as I was going to bed last night here on the west coast of the U.S., the raids across the West Bank were starting to unfold. And it just, this is what the Israeli leadership has promised. They've said, what we're doing in Gaza, we're going to do to the West Bank. And because there have been really no red lines, no punishment, no responsibility imposed by the so-called West on so-called Israel, they are being given free rein in the West Bank as well. So yeah, we have to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, and the tactics are similar. I mean,
yes.
Also late last night I was watching, of course it was early morning in Palestine, I was watching the reporting on Al Jazeera, and some of the reporting, the refugee camps, they just go in with those same D9 bulldozers we see in Gaza being blown apart with the Yassins. And they just tear up the sewer systems, the water systems, the roads, and it's just pure revenge and hatefulness. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about that later.
We will. Yeah, we have a packed show today, and we're going to go to Steven Salaita soon. But did we want to do the Rifat? We have a segment that we want.
Let's talk to Steve first.
Yeah,
we'll come back. That's something very special. I think let's talk to Steve, and then we'll come back to that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. I forgot what the schedule.
Well, we can do what we like, right?
So, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. All right, let's bring in Steve. Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, and so just a reminder that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm Ali Abu Nerma with Nora Barrows-Friedman. Last week, of course, the Democratic Party formally nominated Vice President Kamala Harris as its candidate for president of the United States. And while delegates inside the United Center for the Democratic National Convention in Chicago heard speeches and held a roll call, thousands of people rallied outside to demand that the Democratic Party and the Democratic administration in the White House end the supply of American weapons fueling Israel's genocide in Gaza. During the convention, members of the Uncommitted movement protested that the party refused to allow a Palestinian American delegate to speak from the convention stage. The Uncommitted movement is made up of Democratic Party activists who had called on people to withhold their votes from President Joe Biden during primary elections earlier this year before he withdrew from the race. Some liberal commentators and activists expressed dismay at the Democratic Party's refusal to platform a Palestinian, arguing that this was inappropriate for a party that tries to portray itself as a big tent of diversity. Mother Jones magazine published a draft of the speech that the Uncommitted movement wanted Roa Roman, a Palestinian-American state legislator from Georgia, to give from the convention stage. In the speech, Roman unconditionally endorsed Kamala Harris, did not mention the word genocide, did not even mention that Israel is killing Palestinians and doing so with American weapons, and did not call for an arms embargo on Israel. The speech merely repeated the vague calls for a ceasefire that had already been made by Democratic Party leaders, detached from any specific action that the White House could take right now to impose an end to the bloodshed by its Israeli dependency. Even before the text of the speech was published, many Palestinians had rejected the Uncommitted movement's approach, feeling that putting a Palestinian on stage would be at best an empty gesture and would only help the Democrats whitewash their image, while the party and its nominee, Kamala Harris, remain fully committed to arming Israel as it commits genocide. Why divert energy and attention away from the one demand that would make a difference? Ending the supply of bombs and bullets that Israel is using to tear Palestinian bodies apart around the clock. Ultimately, the party refused to allow Roman even to deliver a speech that offered unconditional support to the party leadership and made no concrete demands on behalf of Palestinians. The controversy underscored the ongoing battles among so-called progressives in the United States about whether to engage with the electoral system, and especially the Democratic Party at all. Joining us to talk about this now is Steven Salaita, a professor of English and comparative literature at the American University of Cairo. He is the author of 8 books, including a new novel that just came out titled Daughter, Son, Assassin. Earlier this year, he published An Honest Living with Fordham University Press. In his own words, it is a memoir about the ostracism and loneliness and alienation and vitality and joy and regeneration that comes of being loyal to the oppressed and downtrodden of this world. I'll just mention briefly that it revolves around his forced departure from academia in 2014 when Steven Salaita was fired from a tenured position at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign for his criticisms of Israel's massacre of Palestinians in the summer of that year, and then his return to academia a few years later. Steven, we're very happy to welcome you to the Electronic Intifada for the live stream, but not your first interview with us. And so we're happy to welcome you back as well. And you're joining us from Cairo.
That's right.
Hi, Steve. Good to see you again.
Hi, thank you all for having me. It's a real honor.
It's an honor for us. So let me just, let's start with the Democratic Convention, because all eyes were on it. And I just talked about the controversy regarding having a Palestinian speaker. And the speaker that the Uncommitted movement wanted was Roa Roman, this state representative from Georgia of Palestinian American descent. She ended up delivering her speech endorsing Kamala Harris outside the United Center in the street. And in an interview with MSNBC's Chris Hayes, she defended her speech, emphasizing the compromises she was willing to make in an ultimately unsuccessful effort to appease the Democratic Party. Let's just take a quick look at that clip before we get your reaction to it, Stephen.
Of Congress wanted to be able to vouch for a potential speaker, asked for some sample language, and we provided it. And the language that we wrote was meant to be in good faith. It included an endorsement. It included a call for unity. It included a personal story. The reality is, anyone who knows me knows I'm incredibly passionate about this issue. I am Palestinian. I have a responsibility for this. And so even though it doesn't call for an arms embargo, those are things we do work for. Even though it doesn't call it a genocide, we still try to capture the massacres that are happening. But at the same time, we understood that this was going to be a moment to show some good faith. And so that is what we were going to talk about.
All right, Steve, are you disappointed that that speech did not get to be made from the Democratic National Convention stage in prime time?
I'm disappointed that the speech got made at all. I agree with your analysis. It's I don't know. We're all tired. I don't want to, find euphemisms. It's a terrible speech. It's an embarrassing speech. I'm not trying to cast aspersions on, the person who delivered it and whoever was behind crafting it, but the final product was bad. And the explanation that we just heard is bad as well. I don't think that we who are concerned with ending this Zionist genocide need to be engaging in what's called good faith. What does that even mean? In this context, good faith means, as she explained herself, not mentioning the genocide, unconditionally endorsing Kamala Harris. These are not the demands that the great majority in our community, let's say the Palestinian American community or the Arab American community, the broader Muslim American community, agree with. It strikes me as a type of unilateral decision making that's not representative of majority sentiment in our community.
But isn't it like, there are people who say, but, just having a Palestinian on stage, especially when Donald Trump is demonizing Palestinians, that by itself is an achievement, just having a Palestinian being visible.
No, that doesn't move me. I don't care who they put up there. Having a Palestinian go up there and unconditionally endorse somebody who is co-supervising the genocide is not any kind of victory. We need a good politics. We don't need these shallow politics of representation. It does nothing for me. I don't really care. There are plenty of people who share some or much of my ethnic/cultural background, and once they get into a position of power and start doing this nonsense, it means nothing to me.
Yeah. Steve, the other argument that we're hearing a lot is that Trump would be worse, that Trump would erase Gaza from the planet. And so we just have to suck it up and vote for Kamala Harris. And when you point out that this is the Democratic Party, which has, as you said, co-signed, authored this genocide, they say, oh, well, Harris has no power. You can't expect her to do anything until she gets into office. This like very kind of exaggerated, almost like grotesque version of the lesser of two evils argument. Is there a lesser of two evils right now? How do we even start to challenge that just very perverse a symbolic statement.
I mean, it is perverse, and honestly, Nora, I don't know how to challenge it. I've been trying for a long time. You have, Ali has, people, the EI, and a lot of other people have, and it's very hard to get that point across. But at this point, after seeing what's been happening in Palestine, in Gaza specifically, just the images that were shown not 15 minutes ago on this very program, and anybody who wants to talk about a worse situation, right, than actual ongoing genocide, right, really needs to step back and reconsider their ethical calculus and why they want to prioritize maintenance of an incredibly violent system, right, that always finds a way to perpetuate itself at the expense of those who are suffering, suffering tremendously the fallout of being on the wrong end of this incredibly violent political system. Trump is horrible. Trump was horrible around Palestine, in his first term as president. Nobody is denying that. But to say that, it's going to be even worse under Trump is, when you sort of break it down to its assumptions and its constituent parts, and incredibly, tremendously offensive and insulting argument. It's probably there's a lot of tacit racism in that argument, and there's a lot of callousness in that argument. I don't even want to begin to try to picture what's worse than everything happening right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a question. I'm curious to get your reaction to a question about language, which of course is something you think about a lot. But I want to continue this thread and get your thoughts on this issue, because, this comes up every, or maybe it never goes away, because it always seems like there's an election coming up in the United States, and which is still if no longer the world's only superpower, still the most significant country in terms of enabling Israel's genocide. So there's a sense that politics in the United States matters to the rest of the world, and particularly to Palestine. And many Palestinian Americans and Arab Americans, and many people who support the Palestinian struggle, feel committed to participating in this political system, even though both of the main parties are openly genocidal towards Palestinians in word or deed, or both. Is it your view that we should refuse to engage with either party? Should we think about third parties? Many people bring up the Green Party, or is this all irrelevant? Where should we be looking and acting if our goal is Palestinian liberation? I know you addressed some of this in an essay at your website that you just published, Steven, at stevensalaita.com, called "Let America Be Your Periphery." But just give us your thoughts on those questions.
For me, it's a difficult ethic to articulate, because I don't want to interfere with anybody else's civic process. I really don't. But I do think that we've come to the point where we need to take seriously the idea of non-participation, with withholding not only our votes, but our participation in the mainstream of the politics. That's where I'm at. That's kind of where I've landed, and we've been really hesitant. Those of us with this opinion, the few that we are, of really sort of pushing that narrative, because it tends to provoke people into a kind of anger and defensiveness, and I really don't want to be fighting with people. I'd say that as Palestinian Americans and anti-Zionists more broadly, if we are committed to Palestinian liberation, that we've gotten to the point where it's time to seriously consider withdrawing that participation, or at least having an open conversation about it, a serious conversation about it. What does it mean? What does it look like? What would the potential outcomes be? What might the optimal outcomes be? And we don't need to be shutting down that mode of thinking anymore, or ostracizing people who raise it as a possibility, because I don't know what we're left with. And I base this on a few things. This began before October 7th, but ever since October 7th, we saw people who were supposed to be, I'm not going to say champions of Palestine, although some folks conceptualize them that way, but people who were, generally speaking, considered sympathetic to Palestine, end up making themselves complicit in the Zionist genocide.
You can name
AOC,
names, Steven. Oh, okay, go ahead.
AOC, Bernie, Ilhan Omar has been weak at times. She talks out of both sides of her mouth. So sometimes she says something good, then sometimes she does something shitty, which to me means that she's shitty, right? Like there's no binary here. You're one or the other at this point. And I look at I didn't even think he was any good politically. Jamal Bowman, they got rid of him. The party turned on him. Cori Bush, who I like better than Bowman. I thought she had a better political record. They got rid of her also. So what are we supposed to be participating in if we care about Palestinian liberation? We need to think about these things, right? Beyond the idea of civic responsibility. Let's think of it in practical terms. What system are we meant to participate in? What place is there for us in this system in the face of so much hostility? Let's just say I decided, okay, I'm going to vote. I'm going to work the electoral route. Who am I to vote for? There are no candidates, right? And they've already shown that if there's a candidate that even gestures in the direction of sympathy to Palestinians, there's a good chance that the party machinery, right, along with the Israel lobby and everybody else, are going to conspire to get rid of them. So we need to think seriously about alternate forms of political, let's say, political practice rather than political participation in this sham of a democracy.
And of course, people were practicing that in the sense that they were organizing and mobilizing to protest outside and across the country. And now people are protesting, organizing to protest at the UN General Assembly when that starts in a few weeks' time. So those are ongoing conversations.
Yeah. And also
Go ahead, Nora. Sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to say also on campuses, I just wanted to point out, in the spring, we saw these major mobilizations across U.S. campuses, across Canadian campuses as well, in support of Palestinian liberation. And of course, university and political authorities and, state and law enforcement responded with an incredible amount of repression and violence against students. And now, as a new academic year begins, these same universities, even, system-wide, like the University of California as a system has engaged in imposing draconian rules aimed at punishing and preventing student protests against the American-backed genocide in Gaza. NYU, one of the most vaunted bastions of progressive free speech and thought and scholarship, has just determined that Zionism is now a protected trait, and so any criticism of Zionism is going to be met with severe repression and academic punishment. Where does this stand? Like, what do you think is the significance of the campus movement and the crackdown in terms of the educational institutions being, a locus for real direct engagement with power? With you've been at the center of it, but what are you seeing now in terms of campuses as the Israeli lobby has called it a battleground?
Mm. It was always that way, but now it's all come to a head. And you know, there always comes a point in the political process in the United States where if things start getting serious and picking up in intensity, that the administrative classes, the managerial classes, the cops, the politicos, and so forth drop all of their pretenses of diversity and inclusion and free speech and just bring the hammer down. And we're seeing that happen now. And so the student movements, and they require a lot of courage, a lot of creativity, a lot of imagination. I don't think that people should be standing on the sidelines and policing how they speak and jeering at them as being unrealistic, because in a sense that, if there's any democratic impulse anywhere in the political landscape in the United States, it's actually coming out of these communities. These are important forms of political participation. And part of the problem is definitional or categorical. People are conditioned in the United States, Canada as well, to understand voting and electoralism as the cardinal forms of political participation. But these are forms of political participation also. Practicing BDS is a form of political participation. Defending students and community members from oppression is a form of political participation, and so forth. Important forms of political participation, I should add. But what people need to do at this point, yes, they need to stand in solidarity with the students and the community members and the faculty members who are being beaten and expelled and repressed in other ways, but also continue to analyze the mythological foundations of the university, the modern corporate university, as a place of learning, as a place where ideas are exchanged, as a place of generosity and abundance. We're seeing now very clearly they're not trying to hide it at all anymore, that they are very blunt instruments of the ruling class, and it doesn't even take much agitation or provocation for them to sort of drop the pretense and go full out fascist with the billy clubs. It has happened at different points in the history of the modern university, and this is one of the more notable examples where the university, right, and its investors, its stakeholders, as it were, are telling us exactly who they are and whose side they're on.
Steven, you said this is sort of one of those historic points, and people have been saying you have to go back to the late 1960s or the early 70s, the Vietnam era, for this kind of violence against students on campuses in the United States. Why this? Why is the crackdown? And we all know that there's always been what we call a Palestine exception to free speech, that you can protest or advocate all sorts of things on American campuses, and people may disagree with you, but you're not going to be fired, you're not going to be punished. I mean, we saw in your case back in 2014, even at the University of Illinois, I covered this very closely, that same university had a history of vigorously defending the free speech rights of an open white supremacist on that campus, and saying, well, we may not agree with him, but those are his views. Whereas you were fired for speaking out against the massacre of children by Israel. So we know that it's all, all the lofty talk about academic freedom and is BS, but why do you think the repression is so? What is it about this moment that is making them take the mask off?
I've said a bunch of times and over the years, and I think if people sometimes, even if they want to believe me, they think I'm exaggerating or being hyperbolic, but to me, it's clear as day now. Better to be, a Nazi or a sexual predator than an anti-Zionist on campus, Right? You're more likely to, to avoid being fired, first of all, or even to move up the ranks in a lot of cases. It's infuriating, it's frustrating, but again, this is the reality we need to confront. This is no time to be idealizing the campus and the system of higher education in the United States. This is the time where we need to situate it as part of the ruling class process, right, of extraction, hegemony, repression, etc. Yes, there are a lot of ideological Zionists, right, as donors, right, as upper administrators, as faculty, as students, and so they can exert a sort of pressure, and so the university is going to look to protect its interests first, their interests first. But I think it's more than that. We probably ought to think about the ways that Palestine and what you might call pro-Palestine activism or anti-Zionist activism has historically appended itself to a number of radical concerns that university stakeholders, that basically terrify university stakeholders, and that they see as anathema and as hostile to their interests and to the interests of the institution. Anti-capitalism, anti-racism, anti-militarism, anti-imperialism. This isn't to say that everybody who is anti-Zionist is also anti-capitalist or anti-imperialist, but the issue of Palestine historically has appended itself to these, to these issues that sort of run alongside it. Black radical thought, anti-racism, right? The Palestine is associated with those things. So in part, I would say that it's the power of Zionist communities within and on the outside of these institutions, invested in these institutions. And on the other hand, it's that they see any sort of pro-Palestine effort as damaging on potentially damaging on a variety of fronts, because pro-Palestine activism goes after their investments, right? It goes after their endowments. It goes after a lot of their relationships with the arms industry and other unsavory elements both inside and outside of the United States. So it is Palestine, but it's not just Palestine. It's what Palestine represents in addition to the physical geography of Palestine itself.
So just thinking, that there's a lot of educators and students, people, academics who watch this live stream. And I wonder, Steven, thinking a decade after your experience, and you spent a few years away from academia, and that's what you talk about in your new memoir, An Honest Living. And now you're back at a university. You're at the American University in Cairo, which is on the one hand an American university, on the other hand in Cairo. So that's an interesting. So it is part of the empire, but at the same time, it's in a slightly different context. So my question is, do you have any thoughts or advice for other educators, people in academia, about how you can hold a moral position, how you can be true to your principles and still exist and function within these thoroughly corrupt and compromised institutions? Or is it impossible?
I have kind of what might be called an existential take on it that folks might find a little bit too abstract, but I've over the past 10 years I've lived what you might call an interesting life. I've had an interesting professional career. I bounced around different places around the world. I was out of academia for 5 years, but I'd really emphasize, to those academics and students who, are concerned with Palestinian life and Palestinian liberation and Black liberation and Native American liberation and the liberation of the oppressed in general, right? The recovery of the dispossessed, any issue having to do with justice, that of course there's a great chance that you're going to run into trouble, but whatever happens, you have to live with yourself. And over these past 10 years, I've been able to live with myself. And that's not a material resource, but you could say it's an intellectual resource and a spiritual resource, and one that I've been tremendously glad to have access to. That it helped me get through whatever struggles I faced. Knowing that I didn't sell out. I made plenty of mistakes. I did some stupid things, but I held firm to a central set of principles, and I'm glad that I did, because not being able to live with myself, I think would have made it really impossible to survive through all of the ups and downs. So figure out, strategy aside, figure out what your core principles are, what your red lines are, if they were, and determine that no matter what they try to do to you, that you're not going to cross them, and that you're going to face down and survive whatever they might try to do with you, as difficult as it is. And without that sense of steadfastness, you're going to put yourself in a position where you get the same punishment, and you sold out at the same time. So you're going to end up with nothing. You're going to end up in the Minouche Shafik situation, right? Or the Claudine Gay situation, right?
Yeah, so just Minouche Shafik is the, for those who don't know, she is the president of was the president of Columbia University. Her background is she's like came from the UK. She's Egyptian, Egyptian. She's Egyptian born, lived in the UK, was ennobled in the UK. I understand she's, has a title of nobility, and she was brought to Columbia to do the dirty work. And of course, at the same time celebrated for being the first Arab woman to head, a major, Columbia anyway, if not a major Ivy League or whatever it is. But she did everything that the donors and the rulers wanted, up to and including calling in the police to beat up and arrest her own students. And then once she did the dirty work, they discarded her completely. So that's who you mean. And Claudine Gay it's a similar story. She was the president of Harvard, and also celebrated for diversity because she was a Black woman brought in to do the dirty work of the ruling class as president of Harvard.
Yeah, it doesn't pay off. I mean, as soon as stuff started popping off at Columbia, I said, okay, Shafik is not going to last. As soon as she doesn't. But I don't think anybody should feel sorry. Like, when the administrators in Illinois, 10 years ago, the chancellor and the provost lost their jobs from the fallout of my firing. And, I was happy that they, that they lost their jobs. It wasn't really a punishment because they get compensated. They get the golden parachute. Then they end up getting very lucrative consulting jobs. So Shafik is going to be fine. Gay is going to be fine. But you're not going to be fine. I'm talking about regular faculty members, student activists, and all. You're not going to be fine. Nobody's going to be there to give you a golden parachute or to pick you up. Think about who you're fighting for and who you're fighting with, and the people in Palestine. Despite it all, despite incalculable hardship and suffering, they're standing tall. They're not giving up. They're refusing to concede, and we have to move forward in that same spirit. And I know I'm speaking again in abstractions, but I think those abstractions are important, because you're going to leave an idea behind and a legacy behind from your activism, from your political work, and it needs to be one that's there for others to latch onto and build from.
Just a note on Shafik, she already landed a job, a high-profile job with the new Labour government in the United Kingdom. So she is getting rewarded for her services to Israel.
Yes. Of course. Yes.
I mean, just, thinking about the way that U.S. academia portrays Palestinian students on their own campuses. and the way that they have ignored Palestinian students in other universities in Gaza. I mean, Israel has destroyed every single university and college, community college in Gaza, hundreds of schools. I see on Twitter all the time of med students taking their boards inside a tent for displaced people, where they can catch like maybe 1 bar of internet signal. Hundreds. I mean, just the fact that so many professors and academics, our dear friend Rifat, for example, at the Islamic University of Gaza, have been assassinated, have watched their universities be blown up by Israeli soldiers. What does that mean for Palestinians for whom education has always been supremely important? I know you've talked a lot about that in your own life, and how you think people around the world, especially in academia, should be relating to the reality of academia in Palestine and Gaza in particular.
Yeah, the education system in all of Palestine has been extremely important historically and contemporaneously. It's been extremely important in Gaza over the decades. And so just like with the hospitals, the Zionist entity targets it on purpose. So it's not just about exterminating and displacing people. It's about weakening their society and making sure that it makes it all the more difficult for them to build back, right? Because expertise is generated in these universities, ideas, intellectual traditions, and so forth. I don't know. I don't have the words for it. I think about dearest Rifat and all of the other students and faculty, who have suffered, who have been killed, who are suffering right now, and there are just no words. And I really don't understand. This is, I hope, a bridge to your other question about observers, academic observers around the world. I don't know how they can go on. Let me just put it this way: things in academic culture, the way we understand certain concepts needs to change, and it needs to change permanently. I mean, it was always the case, but the genocide has made it clear. Let me give you an example. The AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, it's kind of the main academic freedom group out there. It kind of sets the terms of academic freedom and kind of monitors it, intervenes where necessary, just overturned a longstanding policy against academic boycotts. So in other words, the AAUP now allows for academic boycotts. They don't see it as a problem anymore. This is a welcome move. I was happy to see them do it because they were really, really against it, for the longest time, ever since BDS became a thing about 20 years ago. And a lot of academics, there were some people I was surprised to see on the list signed a letter, and then a lot of people I wasn't surprised, condemning the AAUP on the grounds that academic freedom is sacrosanct. And so I get to thinking, it's like, okay, well, obviously these signatories have shit politics, right? That's why they're signing. They're signing it not out of any principle, because they're Zionists. Okay, it's simple enough, right? Nobody's going around playing make believe anymore. Nobody has the time or energy for that, that kind of nonsense. But then I started thinking, well, in a material sense, in relation to what's happening in Gaza, in all of Palestine, right? What does it mean to make an effort to protect this idea called academic freedom over the actual human beings who are being slaughtered? Our colleagues, our students, our collaborators in many cases. What does it mean? What is academic freedom is? What is it? Right? Okay, it's a philosophical question. It's a civil liberty, but it's not something I can hold. It's not something I can eat. It's not something that keeps me warm. It's not something that intervenes in the destruction of an entire nation. What is it? I quite like academic freedom. I think it's important. I would like to see it implemented. Certainly, all of the universities in the United States need a good dose of it, vis-a-vis what they're doing to Palestinians and protesters of all cultural and ethnic backgrounds. But when it comes to stopping a genocide and intervening in a genocide, why would anybody want to prioritize these abstract civil libertarian things in the West? Of course, we have to use whatever means are at our disposal to stop the genocide. Is academic boycott going to stop the genocide? No, but it's a tactic at our disposal, one among many, and we have to use it. Right? To me, a lot of, besides the bad politics that go into people lionizing these notions of civil liberties, academic free speech, etc. In the end, we have to stop fucking genocide. We have to intervene, right? And I'm not going to prioritize these flights of fancy in the West, these mythologies, right, over anything, right, that is going to even minimally help, right, in any kind of intervention to stop this Zionist slaughter. That's what needs to take precedent now, not your privileges at a tenured academic at a Research One institution. These, in other words, I'm ranking things in terms of importance, and stopping genocide goes to the top of the list. Right, your comforts, your creature comforts, and your civil liberties as a professional. Not that academic boycott messes with any of those things, mind you. Right, they're somewhere on down. They're somewhere on down the list. It just has to be that way.
And then, of course, there's this perverse discourse in American and British and Canadian and other Western universities that the thing that has to be prioritized is not stopping the genocide, is not stopping the destruction of universities and educational institutions in Gaza, which aren't more or less important than hospitals and houses or mosques or churches, but should be relevant to an academic institution. So none of that is as important as protecting the feelings of students on American or British or Canadian campuses. So then we get into this discourse about, oh, well, all these protests about Palestine, they hurt the feelings of Zionist students, and we need to prioritize their feelings of safety. And of course, they don't mean any of this. I mean, you can't engage with this in any good faith sense because they don't, it's not anyone's feelings they care about. This is just another cynical, manipulative tactic to shut down the discussion. And it's so plain now. It's all out in the open, as you said.
Yeah, it's over with now. I mean, it's not over. What I mean to say is that there's a thick red line now, right? You're on the anti-genocide side of it, or you're on the other side. And if you're on the anti-genocide part of the line, then everything else is a whole lot of noise. And I've been glad to see that fewer and fewer people entertaining that crap about hurting our feelings, and we don't feel safe, and it's incredible. We see what's going on. We see it in our feeds all the time, and to create a culture where we're not even able to condemn these horrors. It's grotesque. I don't know. I don't have the language for it, but I'm glad that people are caring less and less about appearance. We shouldn't care. We can't control, right, how our oppressor whines and complains. We can't control how administrators and management characterize our politics and our activities, but we can control how we are affected and influenced by this outside noise. And so we have to do our best to ignore it, disregard it, or treat it with the contempt that it deserves.
Well said. Ali mentioned, we just have a couple minutes left, but Ali mentioned at the beginning your book, An Honest Living, which came out, I believe, in February. But then this came in the mail to my house a few days ago. Your first novel. Talk about your novel. Talk about the art of of writing, of imagining, of creating a fictional story in this moment of like absolutely unimaginable horrors and yeah, just talk to us a little bit about your novel, Daughter, Son, Assassin.
Oh, well, thank you, Nora, and I'm flattered that you purchased it or you got hold of it, whatever, and I
We're
hope you
big
will like
fans of Steven
it.
Salaita in our house.
Well, I hope the novel won't change that. You know, I recently did a talk at AUC about what we're doing as literary critics, in a time of genocide, and it came to me when I sat down to write it that we're always doing this sort of thing in a time of horror. Certainly, this is a heightened period of horror, but there's always something horrible going on, and in a way, I think of it as synchronous with the production and the consumption of art. We see the tradition of art, visual art, audio art, literary art in Palestine. Ever since 1900 and before is just phenomenal. We're a society that manages despite all the horror and trauma, or maybe in part because of the horror and trauma, to produce so many beautiful things. And this novel was written a long time ago. It was just published recently, but it was written a long time ago. During kind of a similar but a different political moment, because there's always a political moment in Palestine. Right? There's always a moment of violence. The violence has been continuous, and we're aware of the violence. So whenever we produce any kind of art, and in this I include journalism and nonfiction of the sort that Ali and everybody else does at Electronic Intifada, and does very well, I should say. We're always sort of producing our work, let's say, right? Our work in the backdrop of this continuous violence. So I always think of it as having a dialectical relationship with politics. And so when you read the novel, you'll see that it's not about Palestine per se, but Palestine is omnipresent, and that's how Palestine, I think, functions for a lot of us inside and outside of the nation. That it's what Toni Morrison would have called the absent presence. Even when it's not there, it's there. Even when we're not thinking about it, we're thinking about it, right? It's always sort of influencing us. And so the novel is very directly political in some ways and very abstract in others, but in a lot of ways it's really just exploring in a different medium a lot of the things that we're talking about now, how to survive and make do in a world that's filled with so much hardship and violence.
I was surprised to learn that you're a writer of fiction, and I'm excited to read it. And it's just more evidence of how productive you are as a thinker, as a writer, and as someone who I know I've learned a lot from and continue to learn from over the years. And I have to say, you've often been ahead of us in terms of saying, I think I do, or I like to think that I do this. I say the things that people aren't always ready to hear, and so people get mad at you a lot of the time because they say, "Oh, Ali, you're being too harsh, you're being too hyperbolic," as you said, or but I think you do that even more, and it is an incredibly valuable function and role that people need to play. And I often will say, things you've said over the years, oh, is Steven going a little bit too far with that? And then, very sadly, time proves you right, because often what you're telling us is not necessarily good news, but it's the truth. And you are a truth teller, Stephen.
Oh, I really, I don't deserve those accolades. I would direct them to you, but thank you. That means a lot to me. That's extremely kind of you to say, and I I wish I didn't. I wish I didn't have to be so skeptical. Let's say, but just a lot of experience observing, and it's pretty easy to see where people end up, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Stephen, I wish we could spend more time with you today, but will you come back soon? And I feel like we only touched on some of these things, and we're very grateful for your time, and I hope we can welcome you back soon. In the meantime, where can people check out some of your work and writing? Of course, people should look for your books wherever they buy books, but where else can people find your work if they want to learn more?
Just 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is where I publish very irregularly my essays. Commonnotions.org. It's a wonderful independent press out of Philadelphia and Brooklyn that published the novel, and Fordham University Press for the memoir, if anybody is interested.
Yeah, and that's an honest living. Thank you so much, Stephen. We really appreciate it, and we hope to have you back soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Steve.
Take care.
Take care. Oh, so good. It's always so good to talk to him. Yeah, this novel, again, it's called Daughter, Son, Assassin. It's out, it just came out. And you can, from Common Notions Press. And you can read more about that on Steve's blog. But I think in this time of so much, it just feels like constant gaslighting. Voices like Steve's just kind of pierce through in such a clear and unobstructed and such an important, invaluable way. So yeah, I would love to have him back on soon.
We certainly will.
Yeah. Well, we're going to turn to a short segment before we go to John. Ali, why don't you set us up for this?
Yeah, thanks, Nora. And just a reminder again that you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm Ali Abu-Ni'mah with Nora Barrows-Friedman. This past week at the Electronic Intifada, we were honored to publish a series of short pieces written by our beloved friend and longtime contributor, Dr. Rifat Alareer. Rifat was a poet, a professor, a writer, and mentor to countless students in Gaza, and indeed to people all over the world. He was murdered in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza on December 6th of last year. During the first episode of this live stream, broadcast on October 9th, viewers and listeners could hear the bombs exploding in the background as Rifat described why Palestinians insist on fighting for justice and liberation in the face of Israel's genocidal violence. Rifat's last live stream appearance was on December 1st, 2023, just a few days before his murder. And sadly, it only lasted for a few minutes because his electricity was shut off and we lost the connection. On April 26th of this year, Rifat and his wife Nusayba's eldest child, their daughter Shayma, was killed in an Israeli attack, along with her husband Muhammad Siam and their 3-month-old son Abdurrahman. Their baby was born after Rifat's death and was his first grandchild. We thought it would be important to share some of these previously unpublished pieces that Rifat wrote in October during the first month of the genocide. These pieces will also appear in If I Must Die, Poetry and Prose, an anthology of Rifat's work compiled with an introduction by Yusuf al-Jamal, who was, of course, Rifat's close friend, student, and collaborator. and published by OR Books. It's forthcoming from OR Books. All the royalties from the book will go to Rifat's family, and I'm happy to say that thanks to the support of so many of you, the Electronic Intifada was able to provide an honorarium for the publication of these pieces, which will go to Rifat's family as soon as that is possible. We loved Rifat very much. We miss him, and we carry his voice and work inside us. Rifat wrote this first piece on October 19th, 2023, and I'm going to read an excerpt. In Gaza, we have grown accustomed to war. Horrific experiences of death and destruction have permanently impacted Palestinians' culture, language, and collective memory. Is it war again? Asks my little Amal, aged 7. Memories of the previous Israeli assault still fresh in her mind. The wording of the question shows the maturity she has been forced to develop. Last year, Amal asked her mum if it was another war. Yes, it is war again in Gaza. In Gaza, we have grown accustomed to war. War has become a recurrent reality, a nightmare that won't go away, a brutal normality. War has become like a grumpy old relative, one that we can't stand but can't rid ourselves of either. The children pay the heaviest price, a price of fear and non-stop trauma that is reflected in their behaviors and their reactions. It's estimated that over 90% of Palestinian children in Gaza show signs of trauma, but also specialists claim there is no post-war trauma in Gaza as the war is still ongoing. My grandmother would tell me to put on a heavy sweater because it would rain, and it would rain. She, like all Palestinian elders, had a unique sense, an understanding of the earth, wind, trees, and rain. The elders knew when to pick olives for pickling or for oil. I was always envious of that. Sorry, Grandma, we have instead become attuned to the vagaries of war. This heavy guest visits us uninvited, unwelcomed, and undesired, perches on our chests and breaths, and then claims the lives of many in the hundreds and thousands. A Palestinian in Gaza born in 2008 has witnessed 7 wars, 2008 to 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021, 2022, 2023A, and 2023B. And as the habit goes in Gaza, people can be 7 wars old or 4 wars old. My little Amal, born in 2016, now holds a BA in wars, having lived through 4 destructive campaigns. In Gaza, we often speak about wars in terms of academic degrees, a BA in wars, an MA in wars, and some might humorously refer to themselves as PhD candidates in wars. Our discourse has significantly changed and shifted. At night, when Israel particularly intensifies the bombardment, it's a party. The party has begun. It will be a horrific party tonight. And then there is the bag, capital T and capital B. This is a bag that is hurriedly prepared to contain the cash, the IDs, the birth certificates, and college diplomas. The aim is to grab the kids and one item when there is a threat of evacuation. The collective memories and culture of Palestinians in Gaza have been substantially impacted by these horrific experiences of war and death. Most Gazans have lost family members, relatives, or loved ones, or have had their homes damaged or destroyed. It's estimated that these wars and the escalations between them have claimed over 9,000 Palestinians. It was 7,500 when I started drafting this last week, and destroyed over 60,000 housing units. Death and war, war and death. These two are persona non grata, yet we can't force them to leave, to let us be.
Thanks, Ali. And this piece was written on October 27th, 2023. Rifat titled it, What It's Like When Israel Bombs Your Building. I have 6 children, and so far we have survived 7 major Israeli escalations unscathed. We are an average family. My wife, Nusayba, is a housewife. I have 2 children in college, and my youngest child, Amal, is 7. In Gaza, Amal is already 4 wars old. We are an average family in Gaza, but we have had our fair share of Israeli death and destruction. So far, since the early 1970s, I have lost 20 and 15 last week members of my extended family due to Israeli aggression. In 2014, Israel destroyed our family home of 7 flats, killing my brother Mohammed. In 2014, Israel killed about 20 of my wife's family, including her brother, her sister, 3 of her sister's kids, her grandfather, and her cousin, and destroyed several of my in-laws' homes. Combined, my wife and I have lost over 50 members to Israeli war and terror. 2023 war on Gaza. As the bombs fall and Israel targets sleeping families in their homes, parents are torn between several issues. Should we leave? But go where? When Israel targets evacuees on their way and targets the areas they should evacuate to? Should we stay with relatives? Or should our relatives stay with us, whose home is relatively safe? We can never be sure. It's been more than 75 years of brutal occupation and over 6 major Israeli military onslaughts in the past 15 years. And we have so far failed to understand Israel's brutality and mentality of death and destruction. And then there is the fear of what to do if, when we are bombed. We try to evade them. But how can you evade the bombs when Israel throws 3 or 4 or 5 consecutive bombs at the same home? The big question Palestinian households debate is whether we should sleep in the same room so that when we die together, or whether we should sleep in different rooms so some of us may survive. The answer is always that we need to sleep in the living room together. If we die together. No one has to deal with the heartbreak. So those are just excerpts of a series of pieces we published on the Electronic Intifada. You can go to our homepage and read it there. And again, they will also be included in the new book edited by Youssef El-Jamal about Rifat. And yeah.
And we're hoping to have Youssef on in a few weeks to talk more about the book and other projects that commemorate and keep alive Rifat's work. And of course, as I mentioned, Youssef was a very dear and close friend of Rifat. So I know that editing this book and working on those other projects is very close to his heart, as it is to ours as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Ali. And let's bring on John for the resistance report. Switching gears. Hey, John.
Hey, guys.
Hi, John.
That was great reading.
Thank you.
I miss him.
Yeah, we do. Well, a lot's happened in the last week. Hezbollah retaliates. More confrontations by the resistance factions in Gaza against Israel. Bring us up to date, and yeah, let's go for the report.
All right, let's do it. And as every week, we're going to show you things that happened since you last saw me. All these videos took place in the last week. We look at this map here of Gaza, and we've talked about many of these areas on the show already today. Nora talked about them in her newscast. We're going to focus, at first, we're going to go from the south as usual. We're going to start in Rafah. At this zoom in here, we can see the Philadelphia corridor, which is still at the heart of the situation right now. The Israelis are trying to remain in the corridor. 𝐄𝐿 𝐄𝐿, the defense minister, visited the Philadelphia corridor this week and said that to the troops that they were keeping the corridor. And the fighting this week, as pretty much for the last month, has been focused on Tel Sultan there in the west of Rafah. And pretty much that is the focus of the fighting in Rafah. The invasion is 115 days old in Rafah, which of course the Americans said was a red line. It was bulldozed by the Israelis. But that operation has been now focused pretty much primarily on the Philadelphia corridor as Israel attempts to hold this strategic corridor in negotiations for a prisoner exchange. Just to note, today is the 300th day of the ground war since the Israeli military invaded the Gaza Strip on the 27th of October. So 300 days of ground war. And on Tuesday, the 500th heavy airlift, the Israeli Ministry of Defense acknowledged the 500th heavy airlift by the United States of weapons and material to the Israelis to carry out this genocide. The Ministry of Defense boasted about that, and it's 500 heavy airlift airplanes, but there's also 107 ships, which are considerably larger than the airlifts, although the C-17s that fly the airlifts are massive planes. They're almost hard to believe the size of them. And it's been 50,000 tons of weapons delivered from the Americans to the Israelis, which are then turned around and dropped on the Gaza Strip, the tiny area that Nora described in her excellent newscast at the beginning. More than 55,000 airstrikes in this tiny territory that now Palestinians are pushed into 10% of, and that 10% is under threat by Israeli evacuation orders this week, as we saw the United Nations stop their operations the other day. So another week. Let's get started though on the resistance, because the resistance is steady. There is no indication of any decline in the resistance at all, despite what the Israelis say. This is a Namr troop carrier that's going to get an elevated Yasin strike. They still are firing these weapons consistently. There was more than a dozen operations by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 alone in Rafah this past week. You can see that strike is an elevated strike down on the roof of the Namr, and from too close for the active protection system to engage and through too much. And you can see again, videographer is the spotter. He in the audio of this, you can hear the spotter saying fire. They're part of a team that carries out these operations. So that is in Tel Sultan. There was a couple of these strikes in Tel Sultan. We can go to number 2 after this one here, Tamara. This is the second one. Again, fighters down on the ground, moving through the streets still. You can see just the unbelievable destruction everywhere. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 gives us a little bit of a longer feed here of the exit of this fighter. And again, you can see no active protection system detonating in time for that round, also in Tel Sultan. And these are still, as ever, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 built Yasin 105 RPGs being used. No indication of any lack of these weapons, no indications of using other weapons. They're still using appropriate weapons in all of these instances. And this battle scene is from this week in Tel Sultan. And again, Tel Sultan is right on the edge of the Philadelphia corridor. So the Israelis are expanding this corridor. If we look at number 3 here, we've got anti-personnel Yasins being used here. You can see the soldiers in a window again, still 300 days on. You can see them coming out to smoke a dart here on the deck, just like they're not in an active war zone. And these guys are going to pay the price for this behavior, as ever. And this week, the Israelis claimed the most killed in action that they have in several months this week. And you can see this is a combination. This is a thermobaric warhead, an Iranian single charge 105 millimeter warhead that's being used here, and also an F7 fragmentation warhead. And they're using these in combination. We've been seeing this for a few weeks, maybe months now, using this as a standoff anti-personnel weapon, which is what they're designed for, being used properly. But the combination of the thermobaric, which is a fuel-air explosion, the round has a powder and a fuel that distributes throughout the space, and it's ignited in a fire. And so the F7, the fragmentation warhead, which we'll see coming up in an operation, you can see the fragmentation is devastating anti-personnel weapons. So they're using these from distance, and we've seen them use anti-personnel weapons, of course, packed as bombs, improvised explosive devices. So this combo of the F7, which is a North Korean fragmentation warhead. You can tell those by the red stripe around them if you're looking at these videos. And the single charge thermobaric warhead is the plump circle that you see. So this operation, again, successful, soldiers in a window, still doing it. Let's look at number 4 here, Tamara, because this is another operation. This is in Tel Sultan. This is an attack on the Kamal Adwan High School, which is the Israelis are using as a base. And this 𝐓𝐡𝐞 fighter in a flak jacket here, he's pointing out that the tanks are right outside. He says, look at that soldier with his head popping out. And then they're going to track these 7 triangles heading into this school, using the school as a base. Of course, every accusation of the Israelis is a projection of their own activities. They immediately go to these schools as their bases. And when they're not bombing the schools of Palestinians in sheltering in these schools, they're using them as bases. And you can see the round in this one. You can see the round coming from the upper right to the left. You can see the sustainer motor kick in on the rocket-propelled grenade that's hitting there. And this fighter, he's saying, when we go back around, the fighter's saying, yeah, the fighter's holding, actually, in his hand, you can see he's holding a guerrilla action device. This is a close quarters battle that we're seeing here. We took out the audio of this, still trying to dodge guidelines to keep these videos on air. This is them firing on this after the operation, firing. So the close quarters battle took place after. And when we loop back around here, I'll show you. You can see he's holding the guerrilla action device there. That was what we saw them building during the war a couple months back. And he says, "Oh, Netanyahu, we will shake you to your core. We're not afraid of these tanks next to us." And that's what he's looking at there out the window. The spotter, the cameraman, looks out the window and shows the tanks right outside. He says, we are right in front of them, and you're doing nothing. God willing, we'll bring the hammer down on your head, which is the way that they're approaching this operation. Again, 7 triangles heading into this building, and the tank crewmen hanging outside of the tank there. And again, you can notice the sustainer motor coming through the as this round comes through the screen there. It's kind of neat. You don't usually see that, but I guess it's perfect angle for that. And during this gunfight that's going to break out here, this close quarters battle that follows up this combination. Again, this is the thermobaric. This is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 thermobaric, and then the F7. It's a combo they're using again. And then during this shootout, they say, here we are, the Tel Sultan battalion, with a little more energy than that. But obviously, these fighters are consistently fighting with a certain joy to be defending their people, defending their territory. In face of liquidation, the Israelis keep saying they have been liquidated, and it's, of course, never the case. This is another example of it. And then so number 5 here is actually the second part of this operation. The first part was the attack on the school, and these are the armored vehicles that are protecting the school. This is a high school in Tel Sultan, and you can see an elevated Yassin strike there right into the turret gap, which is what they're aiming for. That APS, the active protection system that went off there, missed the round. It detonated after the round hit. And you can see that on this too. When you don't see the massive flare of flame, that's what you have, a penetration. And that's what the goal of the Yassin, the tandem charge, the goal is to send a pierce. It's to pierce. It's, the tanks don't explode in the sense that sometimes you see in Ukraine or in Russia. The goal is to pierce the tank and send the hot steel inside the tank, and then the tank ignites from the inside, or it just bounces around in the steel bathtub where these soldiers are inside the tank. The tank is a crew of 10 and usually has an infantry, a bunch of infantry soldiers in there, usually between 4 and 6 inside the tank. So it's close quarters, and when those pieces go flying around, the soldiers inside the tank die. And there was 2 killed in action by the Israeli military this week that they admitted were from anti-tank fire, and that's from Yassins. So people sometimes wonder why you don't see the spectacular destruction, although we have seen several spectacular destructions. You can see in the casualty reports that the soldiers are being killed by anti-tank fire, and we took out the audio in this part, but the guy at the end basically goes, "Oh shit," for hitting it, for his buddy hitting that round from a pretty good distance and from an elevated spot. So he was impressed with that shot. Number 6 here, this is an interesting operation. A complex ambush takes place. They're scouting this position that Qassam says has 23 soldiers plus a special forces unit. And you can see this commander here marking out the operation. They put the triangle on the stick man that he's drawing in the window, but he's drawing a floor plan, and the floor plan is accurate. He's got the kitchen with the master bedroom beside it with an ensuite. He's got the staircase, the guest room. He draws the head of the soldiers, and then this is the tunnel ambush. That's the second part of this operation. So he's marking where the soldiers would go. You can see there's the F7 with the red stripe on it, and these fighters going through the tunnel, still using their tunnels in Tel Sultan. This is in Khan Yunis, where Khan Yunis was 6 months of operation in Khan Yunis to destroy tunnels, and the fighters are still using it here. So that's setting up the operation, and this is the execution of the operation. The soldier in a window. You're going to see the Qassam-built thermobaric warhead hit here, and the overpressure blows the curtains right out of the building. So you have an infantry force in that building. And then you can see there, that's the F7. You can see the fragmentation element of that in that strike. And then they have multiple camera angles on this operation because they've been casing this building for multiple days, as they point out in this video. And you can see the inside of the room there, how the thermobaric warhead works and why it's such a devastating anti-personnel weapon. You fire it into these Israeli positions inside a building, and it fills the entire floor with the explosion. And these operations, again, there you can see the fragmentation element of the F7. Each of those are pieces of hot steel flying around. And so the combination of these two weapons is a tactical thing that we didn't see earlier in the war, but we have seen for the last couple months being used very effectively. Now these fighters are going to go underground here and link up this Radia anti-personnel weapon. If you can get through the tunnels, you do the anti-personnel weapon. If you're standoff, you fire the anti-personnel weapon with a Yasin. So here they're fighters detonating in a tunnel entrance in Khan Yunis. This is in Al-Qarara on the north, to the north of Khan Yunis. The operations of the 98th Division have been moving around. Again, look at here. He's got the entire floor plan of the building, and he's got it in 3 dimensions because they're going to fire from the side angles. So those windows on the side are key to the way this operation takes place. And so, again, you can see the triangles on his stick man. The boys have a sense of humor and a sense of purpose, both in their operations, which is something that we have seen consistently, and communicating with each other. And as a commander, which is showing command and control. These operations are tunnel-borne operations. The Israelis haven't even come close to dealing with the tunnels. They're still, anytime you see Israeli tunnel achievements, they're talking about achievements that are less than 10 meters deep, which is essentially basements. The tunnel apparatus, especially in Rafah, in Tel Sultan, these tunnels are 80 meters deep, so they're not even close to getting down to the layers that would neutralize the tunnels. And as Israeli military people have said, there's not enough TNT in Gaza to destroy 500 miles of tunnels under Gaza. They don't know how many miles of tunnels, but 500 is the number that they've been using this war. Yahya Sinwar said 500 kilometers a couple of years ago. So it's a believable number. And you can see the round blowing out the curtains that the Israelis love to put on these otherwise empty buildings to indicate where they are. And these positions, they feel safe in these, they clearly feel safe in these positions, and they are clearly not safe. There's fighters all around. We're watching here from 3 different camera angles. So you saw the people getting briefed by the commander. You saw multiple fighters involved in the operation. You saw the bomb linker and detonator, and then you're seeing 3 cameramen. So they're all over this area. casing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance of Israeli positions. And because of the predictive nature of their intelligence, they're predicting the route that the Israelis will take to that tunnel entrance. So really interesting operation there in Khan Yunis, after the Khan Yunis brigade was under attack for 6 straight months from December until the Ramadan ambush, when they got chased out. And now they're carrying on in Khan Yunis with the 98th Division and have met nothing but resistance. 15 operations this week alone in Khan Yunis. So as you can see, this guy doing his sketch again. Okay, let's go to number 7, Tamara, because we have rocket fire here. We have the M90, named after, you can see the size of this rocket, named after Ibrahim Makadma, who was a senior Qassam founder, a founding fighter and thinker. And you can see this fighter says, "The mission we are executing is on the occupied city of Tel Aviv, which will be under fire from the Al-Qassam brigades. And the enemy will know, no matter how much they try, no matter how much they believe they've accomplished their goals, here we are on the ground fighting. We will bomb them with rockets of this heavy caliber. This is our land, and the land knows who loves it, and the enemy is a stranger to it." So we're seeing these M90 rockets. These were the smaller version of this, the M75, was the first rockets fired out of Gaza to hit Tel Aviv, and that happened in the 2012 war. And you can see him here with his iron peacemaker, peace enforcer rocket controller, which is a play on the Iron Dome. And you can see the rockets heading up, and in the background of this video, you can hear a kid shout from one of the camps in the distance, "There it goes." So you often get in these rocket videos cheering from people inside Gaza when they go off. That's actually been the case for decades when these go off. And then you can see that was from a makeshift launcher to launch those heavier rockets on Tel Aviv. And these are shorter range rockets that are fired on Israeli concentrations on the other side of the border of Khan Yunis. So these rockets were fired from Khan Yunis right under the nose of the Israelis while they're carrying out this operation. And of course, civilians have been pushed out of Khan Yunis. So there's no civilians. These are being fired right under the nose of the Israelis. And if we go back one more time quickly, Tamara, you can see when they're programming the rocket controller, you can see they're setting the time, and this is going to be something that's relevant for the Hezbollah operation too. The rocket controller sets the time of the launch. So they set up in the day, they set up beforehand, they set the rocket up, and then they program the launch to be for after dark. Usually they program them for 9 p.m. And that's part of the psychological operation, is that they tell you that the rockets are coming at 9 p.m. And then they do. And the Israelis are looking for where those rockets are launched. The Israelis, look at this launcher here, this makeshift launcher that they're using. The Israelis dug in. The Israelis bragged that they blew up this launcher, this buried launcher. So they're just scrambling for any kind of, you see there, he's setting the time there for the launch, and he's setting the multiple launches. And so the fighters are gone from this area when the rockets are fired. And if there's counter battery fire, the fighters are gone from that area at the time. And that's going to be something that we see in the Hezbollah operation coming up too. And again, these are named the M90s after Ibrahim Makadma, and Makadma was an important leader of Qassam. He wrote a book about the path of armed struggle, Guideposts on the Road to Liberating Palestine, 1994. That's an important book that's studied by the fighters and read widely in Gaza, talking about not repeating failed mistakes, how to build a culture of armed struggle. And a lot of those things now, 30 years on from that book being written, have really come to fruition. And that's one of the reasons why the Qassam brigades and Hamas more broadly are not able to be defeated. They're not a group that you can defeat. These ideas are embedded in the population, and the spirit of resistance is a critical part of their popularity. It's all their popularity. And so the Israelis have failed, of course, in all of their objectives against 𝐤𝐿 and the will for generations to come because of this kind of, in part because of these leaders that were assassinated. �Mqadam was assassinated in 2003. He was partly responsible for the plan to attack the settlements in the Gaza Strip in the latter half of the Second Intifada. He's credited with the operation that blew up Merkava tanks on the outside of settlements, one particularly in Beit Lahia, that the Israelis said they were responding to when they assassinated him. And these operations these tank destroying operations were part of the reason that the Israelis left the Gaza Strip, because these operations were a qualitative increase in the nature of the operation than anything that they had experienced before in the 40 years of the settlement project. So again, naming their weapons after very important people. And if you want to study the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, you can look through their weapons and look at who they're named after and do a little reading about who they are, and you can see why they named those weapons after them. So that is the South, Khan Yunis and Rafah operations. Again, more than 30 operations combined in those two locations just in the last 7 days. So no indication of any degrading. Of course, the war is costly. The war is costly for Palestinians. It's costly for the fighters. It's costly for the Israelis. It's costly for Israeli citizens as well. So we're not pretending that it's not costly, but in terms of destroying the military infrastructure of the group, we're not seeing any indications of that being true. So let's move to the Netzarim corridor, which is the other strategic corridor that the Israelis are attempting to take. And you can see here, we might have to actually adapt this map because the Israelis have spent the last 2 weeks widening the corridor. They're expanding this corridor. Abu Ubaidah calls the corridor of death. There was some reporting this week that there's been more than 30 Israelis killed along this corridor in operations, although it's difficult. The number may be higher because it's difficult to know exactly where the casualties take place. The Israelis always are vague about, they don't say in the Netzarim corridor, they say in northern Gaza. And you have to kind of put the pieces together on that. But the operations have been, previously, we've been reporting on Tel El-Hawa. They were expanding the Netzarim corridor in Tel El-Hawa there in the southwest. And now this week, they've been expanding it in Zaytun, in the Zaytun neighborhood. And Ronan Bergman, who reports for the New York Times, but always writes completely different stories in Hebrew, wrote in 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐨𝐧𝐢 this week in Hebrew about Netanyahu sending to the negotiations in Cairo, sending his negotiators with a plan to create a moat, a trench, a moat along the Netzarim corridor as the way to enforce the split. They're trying to prevent people from coming back home to the north, and that's the method that they're doing it. And they disgustingly call it the drain because they want a major checkpoint for everyone to filter through a massive checkpoint before they re-enter the north. And that's what's holding up these negotiations on a ceasefire, because these are just clauses that Netanyahu throws in on already agreed upon principles. And Ronan Bergman, writing in 𝐓𝐻𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐴, wrote about how the families of the captives, the Israeli captives, are always hanging on one thing, that if they fix this one part of the agreement, maybe they'll maybe we can free the hostages, in their view. And Bergman says no, because Netanyahu will just add another clause to it, which is interesting because that framing of Netanyahu avoiding the ceasefire agreement and the prisoner exchange, it's not how he writes in the New York Times, and then not how the New York Times covers this. So in the Netzarim corridor, there's been a number of operations this week. Let's look at number 10. This is an operation, sniper operation, again, an Al-Ghul sniper operation. Al-Ghul, Adnan Al-Ghul, the founder of the professionalization and expansion of 𝐤𝐿's indigenously built weapon system. So they named the most fierce rifle after him. And this rifle has, of course, killed scores of Israelis. And they're about to do another one here. We again cut it out because we want to keep these videos online. But let's just say if you're at the shooting range, it would be right where the bullseye is on the target at the shooting range. here. And if when we watch it, we'll loop it one more time around so I can show you this. If when we loop it around here tomorrow, you can see that we're going to see the gray tipped Israeli military industries bullet that he puts in there. Maybe you can't see it. You can see it on a freeze frame up close. I checked it out for you. It's gray. So that's an armor-piercing incendiary round that is Israeli military. These were rounds that were captured. So we're still seeing them using captured rounds to kill Israeli soldiers. And this is near the University College of Applied Sciences. They're using this university. They destroyed it, and now they're using it as a base, and using it as a base in the corridor. Got that guy killed. And there was an Operation 2 in Zaytun this week that killed at least 4 soldiers and injured 8. And again, that points to Abu Ubaidah talking about how these operations are only a part. What you see on video is not all of their operations. It's only a part of their operations. And so that ambush and booby trap in Zaytun shows you that. We don't have any video of it. Despite the fact that the Israelis claimed that they were that the intelligence used for the hit was through closed circuit television cameras, which of course we know has been true since the beginning of the war. And so this operation that we're looking at here, we can loop this around to tomorrow. This is a Zawari drone. This is a suicide drone. One-way attack drone, explosive-laden drone. I showed you this last week. If people didn't see last week's show, check out the segment on YouTube about it, because I dug into it a little bit. But this is named after Mohammed Zawari, who is the founder of the drone program. And the first drone was launched in the 2014 war. But in this war, they've used upwards of 50. They used more than 30 on October 7th as part of the operation. The blinding and cover operation for the beginning of October 7th included 3 dozen of these built weapons. And you can see it's just hand launched. The fighter's launching it with his hand, and off it goes. And that we've seen a number of these. So this is targeting Israeli positions in the Netzarim corridor. And the longer the Israelis stay in the Netzarim corridor, the more we'll see operations like this, because the Palestinians can calibrate what weapons to use in that space. And so this week alone, there was more than 25 operations on the corridor. And that, to me, is an unsustainable number of operations going forward. If the Israelis intend to stay in this area, especially if they pull out of other areas and just intend to hold the Netzarim corridor, where the resistance can focus entirely on that corridor. And as we know, the Israelis don't know enough about the tunnels to know the tunnel network underneath the corridor, although they keep telling their population that they find 250 meters of a tunnel here or there, and blow it up on camera and release that footage. So like I said, there was the booby trap operation. So there was at least 6 killed in the Netzarim corridor this week alone. And last week we saw the operation where there was 2 killed by the new recruits operation. So lots going on in the Netzarim corridor, lots of resistance in the corridor, and the corridor is part of the strategic aims of the Israelis to wrestle some sort of victory out of this defeat that they're experiencing in Gaza, which is to chop up the territory and make it more manageable, and to hold the Philadelphia corridor on the Rafah border to try to prevent weapons smuggling. But as we know, we've been watching this every single week. We're not seeing a lot of smuggled weapons. You see actually very few smuggled weapons when you really think about it. We saw that HJ-8 system, the Chinese system that the Rafah Brigade has. We've seen a couple of Cornets. We've seen a Concours be fired. But for the most part, what we're watching is indigenously made Palestinian weapons that are made from unexploded ordnance from Israeli weapons, which there's now more than ever in Gaza. And holding the corridor isn't going to prevent Palestinians from rebuilding their weapons industry, because they have unexploded ordnance, and all the metal that comes with those bombs when it's not exploded can all be reused in these weapons. So again, I think it's a failed strategy. It's preventing a prisoner exchange and the end of the war, which is of course what Netanyahu has been trying to do from the start. So that is the resistance report from the Gaza Strip. Let's dig into this operation in Lebanon. From Lebanon, Hezbollah responded to the assassination of Fouad Shukr, the chief of staff of the Hezbollah of the Islamic Resistance, who was assassinated 28 days ago in the Dahia by the Israelis. And this operation is called Operation Arba'in, a day of revenge. It's timed for the 40th day after the death of Imam Hussein and the Ashura celebrations. And it was a 5:50 a.m. operation. It began at 5:50 a.m. And I'll just frame the operation and then I'll show you the target maps after that. So at 5:15 a.m., something around 340 rockets were fired, which is the most Hezbollah's fired in a single day, possibly ever, because the height of the 2006 war was 150 a day. They're firing 150 a day for the last week and a half, with Israel on high alert. And so 340 rockets is the most significant since October 8th, when Hezbollah joined the war. And it's a two-stage operation. Stage number one is to flood the north, 11 military bases in the north. We can look at map number 19 here tomorrow. We can look at these 11 bases that were targeted. And you can see they're all along the Upper Galilee and the Upper Galilee Panhandle, and then along the occupied Golan Heights. And it was to saturate the Iron Dome. So the first stage was to fire these 340 rockets. The Israelis say 250 rockets. But of course, there's a military censor in Israel, so we don't know. They can say whatever they want. Nasrallah said it was 340 rockets. And the goal of the first stage of this operation is to tie up the Iron Dome for the second stage. And the second stage was tens of drones. They didn't say the number. Tens of drones. The Israelis said more than 20 drones were launched. And those drones targeted the Ein Shermer base, which is a military airfield that goes back to it was a British airfield that went back to the British mandate. Today it hosts the Israeli aerial defense array. So their Arrow systems, their David Sling, and their Iron Dome. They're based out of that base. And so that was a sub-target. Nasrallah called that a sub-target because it's targeting the base. It's also a drone base, and it was a drone assassination carried out on Fouad Shukr. So these are parts of the reason why they targeted, is the link to the assassination of Shukr, Haj Mohsen, and the people responsible for it in the Israeli military branch, because the main target was Glilot, which is an Amman base, the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate, and Unit 8200 is at that base, as well as Mossad. So two-stage operation. So in this map here, there's no video of this operation. So I'm just going to show you the Hezbollah target cards that they released. So this is the first one. You can see the bases. If we go to number 20, here tomorrow, I could describe some of these bases to you, but these are basically just these maps that we're familiar with. Hezbollah using these maps in great detail that show that they know where everything is on each of these bases. So we're looking at a barracks here, which is an IDF Beit Hillel IDF battalion headquarters. Zuara artillery position. Kiala barracks is an aerial defense array base in the Golan. Yoav barracks is also, so they target barracks and bases. Barracks are where the soldiers are stationed. There's sleeping quarters and dining halls and whatnot. They targeted the Nafa base, which is a command headquarters of the 210th Division, which is the Golan, which is the IDF division in charge of the Golan. Another barracks and artillery base in the Golan, Ramat Naftali barracks, which is a border company base. Ein Zaytim base, which is the IDF Northern Command headquarters. Mount Meron, which we have seen be battered, and we're going to show you one of those later on in the show here. But that's their air traffic and surveillance base, their key base, and another artillery position, and the newly established field headquarters of the 146th Division Command. So they're new bases are being added, and Hezbollah likes to add those details, that they're new bases, new field headquarters. A field headquarters is less than a base. It's just like where you put a tent up. And Hezbollah always likes to point out that they know exactly what's under those tents. So that was the rocket fire. So they saturate with the rocket fire. Most rockets Hezbollah has fired in the war, in order to tie up the air defense systems for number 21 here tomorrow. And this is the first target, is the Israeli Air Force base at 𝐴ין This is a drone base. It's 75 kilometers from the blue line. I was going to say Lebanese border, but there's no borders. Israel doesn't have borders. It's the only country in the world that doesn't have borders. It has a few tenuous armistice lines. And so let's say 75 kilometers from the tenuous armistice line, and 40 kilometers from Tel Aviv. And the 𝐴ין control base is the control base for Heron drones. And it's also a drone testing site and UAV base. Those runways are for unmanned aerial vehicles, again, who carried out the assassination. 𝐴ין is multi-layered aerial defense and air defense command base that has, as I said, the Arrow systems, David Sling systems, Iron Dome systems, and that's where the batteries are positioned there. It's also the headquarters of the Menashe Brigade. And it's an airport that's used for drone experimentation. So we're 72 kilometers is the exact number that Hezbollah says from the border. And interesting to note on 𝐴ין is that we remember back to the Iranian missile attack, and in the days around that attack, researchers at the University of Texas at Austin attempted to identify where the GPS spoofing was happening. People were talking about how their phones always kept telling them that they were at the Beirut airport, and airplanes complained about how they had lost their GPS. And it was because of GPS spoofing, and they located that GPS spoofing as coming from the 𝐴ין base. And so it's aerial defense, drones, and the spoofing, GPS spoofing that they use as a form of electronic warfare, to try to get to try to throw off the flight path of the drones that Hezbollah is firing. So that's why they picked that target. But this is the key target, number 22 tomorrow. We can see this here. And this is Hezbollah is going to show this, because responding to this operation, the assassination of Fouad Shukr, the expectation was, as Nasrallah has said many times, if you bomb Beirut, we're going to bomb Tel Aviv. And so Fouad Shukr was in the Dahia in Beirut, and people were expecting this operation to be targeting Tel Aviv, especially Israelis. They were on a state of high alert. But this was the main target. This is the main military intelligence base, Amman. The military intelligence is the top tier of intelligence in Israel. Shabak and Mossad are distant seconds to military intelligence. They're the key intelligence organization in Israel, is Amman, the military intelligence directorate. This base houses Unit 8200, which is the signals intelligence unit. That would have been what used to intercept calls, and would have been part of the pinpointing of where Fouad Shukr was for the assassination. We're also seeing on this map here that it shows that there's a military intelligence division college, so for the study of military intelligence as well. And also the communications battalion of the military intelligence, and also a key Mossad base. So this base is a super important base. This base is located just outside of Tel Aviv, 110 kilometers from the Lebanese border. So the deepest strike of this war, the most rockets of this war, targeting a key base for the first time in Hezbollah's war with Israel. So these are very important distinctions of operational success of this mission. Although there was some expectations that there would be a greater response to the assassination of Fouad Shukr. Nasrallah did say that after this operation, that they believed that the operation was successful and that everyone could relax, which was sort of toning down the red alert that everybody, both in Lebanon and Israel, were experiencing. Waiting, you can see there's a Unit 8200 base, and you can see the radar domes up there for their signals intelligence. And its massive campus that you can see there. So significant targets. Of course, there's a military censor in Israel. If anyone releases any information about targets, about the targeter, any information, military information, you go right to jail. If you rape and murder prisoners in a torture camp, you do not go to jail. You get house arrest. But if you talk about a Hezbollah strike on the military intelligence base, you'll go to jail immediately. So we don't know all of these details. The Israeli details that we got from Israel said that they scrambled 100 jets for 275 airstrikes on 40 launch pads after the fact that they hit, because the Israelis themselves admitted that they didn't have intelligence on this operation. They didn't know what was coming. And what they did was they attacked. The Israelis say they preempted the attack because they sent fighter jets up about 15 minutes before the operation took place, because they saw the movement of fighters. They didn't know where they were going or what they were doing. They saw the movement of fighters, and Israel attacked. And so Nasrallah pointed out in his speech after this operation that the Israelis said that they preempted the operation, but they didn't. They struck after. It was an aggression. So Nasrallah made the distinction between preemption and just aggression, attacking platforms. And they got some of the platforms, as is the case. You can hit the platforms after they launch, because you can see where they launch from. But they were just simple Katyusha rockets. Hezbollah did not use their strategic precision ballistic missiles, their devastating arsenal that we saw last week on the show in their underground bunker. So they didn't use a really important key strategic weapon for this attack. They used drones, dozens of drones, tens of drones was the word that Nasrallah said. And just to give you some sense from Nasrallah about the whys of this operation. So some of the questions that he answered were, why the delay? And he said, because that it was 28 days after the Hajj Mohsen assassination. And Nasrallah said it was because of target selection. They were trying to decide on the right targets, that it was also because of the state of alert. Israel and the US were in maximum state of alert. And Nasrallah said if we hurried, that we might fail in the operation. So also, this is something that we hear from other resistance axis powers waiting to attack, is that the delay is part of the operation. The delay, this is a psychological punishment. It's a financial punishment, because, as they say, they have 100 fighter jets in the air. So it's a financial punishment. It's a burden on society waiting to see what's going to happen. So that's part of it. The other reason Nasrallah said, was that the axis of resistance discussed amongst themselves, because the Ansar Allah movement is going to respond for the bombing of the Hodeidah port that Israel carried out. And Iran still is going to respond for the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in a government guest house in Tehran. And so the other reason Nasrallah said was that they gave the ceasefire talks that were happening a chance. They weren't going to put a missile through the ceasefire talks and be blamed for breaking down the ceasefire talks when, as Nasrallah pointed out, they're a farce, and Netanyahu shows they're a farce. So they wanted to give time for Netanyahu to show himself to be a farce, and then they carried out this operation. And again, the considerations that went into it, they attacked military bases. Israelis expected attacks on civilians, because that's how Israel would do it. But they didn't. They attacked military positions. They attacked Tel Aviv, because that Amman base is just on the outside of Tel Aviv, and they attacked deeper than Haifa. The other base was south of Hadera, so deeper than they've struck before. So these are operational successes. I went over the targets, the weapons. I went over those 340 Katyushas, so cheap, easy to fire, easy to replace launchers and rockets. and they did not use their strategic ballistic missiles, which Nasrallah pointed out. And the timing of it, he said that it was after the Arba'in prayer, after the Fajr prayer at 5:15 a.m., that all the launch pads were ready before the launch. And that Nasrallah noted that this was the first time they've ever fired drones from the Bekaa Valley. And Nasrallah said every single one of the drones crossed the border into Israel. The Israeli version of the story is that they preempted what was supposed to be 500 rockets, so they cut something like 40% of the rockets, although at the beginning they had ludicrous numbers saying that they smashed 6,000 rocket launchers. Nasrallah pointed out that those launch tubes were $8,000 to $10,000, and they're not worth the lives of their fighters, which the Palestinians show as well. You set them on timers, and then you're out of the area by the time the anti-battery counter battery fire comes back on you, your fighters are gone. So Nasrallah said in his speech, does that mean the case is closed for the Fuad Shukr assassination? And he seemed to indicate it was. He told people to relax. He straight up said people can relax, that they would see they would check the damage assessments. Again, military censor makes it difficult to do that. It would be interesting to see how if Hezbollah can have drone footage of their strikes. But as for now, all we have is these targeting cards that we're showing you here on the screen. So an operational success for sure, deeper than ever into Israel, more rockets than ever, but far less, I think, than many people expected, Israelis themselves. And I think that there's reasons for that. Nasrallah basically has been saying it for months, that they're not trying to throw the world into World War III. They're escalating rungs up the escalation ladder. And this is clearly a rung. This is a 2-rung climb up the escalation ladder. And it's possible for a war to start based on climbing the escalation ladder, but that Hezbollah wasn't going to give Netanyahu what he wants, which is just an open war that protects his government and protects his failures, because as soon as he's out of power, he's going to go to jail for corruption, and then he's going to be framed as the worst prime minister in Israeli history for the attack on October 7th and the failure of this war. So that's the Arba'in Operation Day of Revenge. And I'm just going to show you one quick 23 tomorrow. I just wanted to show you one quick Hezbollah operation because I always like to point these out. This is a Mount Meron. Again, this is the air traffic control base. And just look at when this is an Almas top attack anti-tank missile, and watch as it flies in. Just look at the tattered radar domes on this site, because the Mount Meron site's been pummeled. And as I always point out, and it's important to remember in these wars, that the Almas is a reversed engineered IDF spike system, anti-tank guided missile system that was captured in its entirety by Hezbollah. Look at that, how tattered that dome is. It's been hit so many times. But Hezbollah captured the spike system and they sent it to Iran. It was reverse engineered and it appears in battle with devastating effect, as you can see there. So it's be interesting to see what weapons the Palestinians capture in Gaza that we'll see in 20 years from now in the upcoming battles. So that is the summary. That is the resistance report. It is the summary of the Operation Arba'in, Day of Revenge, and also the consistent and steady resistance in the Gaza Strip that is continuing apace.
Thank you so much, John. So much. I mean, more windows. It seems like every week there's more soldiers and more windows. Plus the Netanyahu's like fantasy project of a moat.
Yeah, the moat. That was
in that Supreme Court. That's incredible. And then
like every child's dream.
It's
absurd.
It's sociopathic. Absurd. Yeah. But I think what's important to point out, and this is, something that I had to kind of repeat to myself over and over again after the Hezbollah strike retaliation, is that what Palestinians, Yemenis, and Hezbollah are fighting is a war of attrition now. It's not like it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, the patience that Hezbollah has shown with that retaliation strike, the patience that Iran's retaliation hasn't even come yet. I feel like the strategy is now more and more that basically burning out is Israel's military capacity, as a real mode of attriting their military, while the internal Israeli society is collapsing, their economy is completely in the tank. And there's more of like strife between members of the military itself, and fallouts between government ministers. Is that how we should be kind of analyzing this? What do you think this looks like now? Oh, you're muted.
That's what they're setting up. They're setting up a war of attrition, and the Hezbollah is able to fight a war of attrition more or less endlessly. They have villages evacuated in the south as well as Israel that we know. More than 40 villages in Israel are evacuated, and it's a hardship for the civilians in those neighborhoods. But they're able to fight a war of attrition, indefinitely, much more able to than Israel.
Yeah.
But they always did. I mean, that's the thing to remember, which was that was always Hezbollah's mode of fighting, in a sense, because they wore the Israeli military down over 20 years when it was occupying southern Lebanon, until the Israeli military and its collaborator militia, the South Lebanon Army, essentially collapsed and fled in 2000. And what I've been thinking about, I mean, this is sort of a big picture thought, but I want to come back to some of the focus on what Hezbollah did, is that especially now, if you factor in Israel's large-scale assault in the northern West Bank, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Lebanon, I mean, this is in a way a terrible thought, but it occurs to me that there may never be a ceasefire. There may never be a ceasefire. This may be how, this is going to be the reality for the indefinite future on multiple fronts, which is intensified fighting that of the kind we've seen over the last 11 months. Now, if you take it back to Hezbollah's strike on Israel, and John mentioned that, it was less than some people expected. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah's speech was so interesting and masterful in so many ways. He spoke with such nuance to so many audiences in that speech. And one thing he said that was particularly significant, I mean, he said, John went over some of the key points, but he said, when we were thinking about the targets, he said, first of all, we decided, we're not going to target civilians for all the reasons that they wouldn't do that. We're not going to target infrastructure. So people had been thinking they would target Ben Gurion Airport or the port in Haifa or other types of. He said, we're not going to target infrastructure. He said, we wanted to target sites that had a direct connection to the attack on Beirut that killed Fuad Shukr, and then he explained how the two sites that John talked us through had a connection, the military intelligence and the Air Force, and so on. And of course, there are reasons for that, which is that he doesn't want to give Israel a pretext to destroy Beirut Airport or bomb the power stations in Lebanon, as Israel has done repeatedly, time after time after time. So it was very carefully calibrated. But something else he said that was very interesting, when you see those videos of those precision missiles flying right into like Israel's main air defense, air traffic control site, and you think, wow, where are the air defenses? Where are the Israeli missiles to shoot this down? And they're not there. And you see that they hit that dome. It's very easy to believe that Hezbollah is in many ways on a par with Israel, if not superior in many ways. And Nasrallah made a point of saying in his speech that, look, we're not as strong as Israel. You know, our strength comes from our determination, our faith, our commitment to our cause. And, you know, yes, we've developed, but don't think we're as strong as Israel, which is backed by the United States and backed by the whole West and so on. And I think he made this, you know, I don't recall, of course, you know, I could be wrong, but I don't recall him saying something like that before. And I think that was in a way to manage people's expectations and to say, look, we have to be very careful and thoughtful with the resources we have. And that now, and he said, now we're back to the support front. In other words, it's not that, you know, this particular file is closed. I mean, he added some caveats that you know, we don't need to go into detail, but we're back to the support front. So, you know, we're still going to continue attacking the Israelis every day along the line and so on. So I thought those points were worth pointing out, that we're not going to get from the resistance sort of one big blow that knocks Israel out, because nobody has the power to do that right now. And so really the effective strategy is attrition. That's how you can wear them down, because the resistance has the ability to prevail or to last longer in a war of attrition than Israel does. So that's what I got from the speech that I think is very important.
Yeah, he seemed to be aware that people were waiting for a mass explosion or some sort of devastating strike on Tel Aviv, and I think that he put that into context, that they're not trying to start World War III and destroy their country by carrying out unthought through actions. And so I think it's responsible and rational response. I think that there was, you know, there's considerable talk about whether that strike matched the stature of Fouad Shukra, who's the leader of Hezbollah, and Nasrallah noted that that was the first operation that was carried out without their chief of staff in their history, because they always replace them very quickly. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of, I just think there's a lot of natural like hope that there's something that can stop the genocide in Gaza, that there's some method of attacking Israel in some way that can stop the genocide. And I don't think that Nasrallah believes that that's true. And he's been saying that in speeches for months and months about patience and about the trajectory of the Israeli state and about the lack of resilience in their state, and how those are going to be amplified by a war of attrition. So, yeah. And I think it's just interesting, right? Because Israelis expect you to massacre civilians. So they're all like, whew, that was it? That was the attack? Because we would have, speaking for Israelis, like we would have just massacred thousands of civilians. And we were under red alert. They were under red alert and homeland directives about, not being in public. Schools were closed. The airport was closed again, in their tourism season. So,
what tourism season?
Yeah, they didn't get their tourism season. Just another thing that the attrition has.
Yeah.
I feel like we should talk, we have sort of a couple of things we want to go through, but I think we should jump to those articles those items that sort of show how the attrition is affecting Israeli society. We can come back to some of the other things if we have time.
Yeah, so there are a couple of items. There was an editorial in Haaretz about how the startup nation is basically over and done with. That not only have businesses, tech businesses in Israel closed as part of this like massive wave of business bankruptcies, but the tech sector is basically done.
Shutdown nation.
Shutdown nation, exactly, as 𝐄𝐥𝐿 has said. Yeah, Ali, did you want to talk about that specifically?
Yeah, this was actually a
yeah.
report in the Marker, which is the sort of
Right.
the financial and business supplement of Haaretz, which is, of course, the well-known Israeli newspaper. And the headline is, I think we can actually maybe even show it on screen, but the headline is that it's directly tied to the war. Money has dried up and Israeli startups are folding. And it starts by saying, a review by the Market indicates that a string of Israeli startups have shut down or significantly reduced their activity in the past year, with the trend being even more pronounced in recent months. And then it says, it says, quote, "We had sales of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year and we're nearing 1 million. We sort of had momentum, but we were unable to raise money," says Raviv Kula, a co-founder of the agri-tech company FruitSpec. The company's last funding round was completed in 2021 and it raised $5 million. It tried to raise another $4 million last year, but couldn't get commitments for the entire sum. The funding round didn't happen, and in February, the company shut down and 20 employees were laid off. It's directly tied to the war, says Kula. Foreign investors disappeared, and those who wanted to work together said it wasn't the time. Investors in Israel who had expressed interest also decided to pull out. That's the situation in other companies too. It's very hard to raise money even in small amounts. So, and they'd say that this is repeated dozens of times, if not hundreds of times. And what's interesting there, and it does remind me of our conversations in recent months with 𝐄𝐿, is it's not only the foreign investors who are saying, we're not going to put money into Israel now. It's Israeli investors saying we're not going to invest in Israel right now. And so you have capital flight, you have accelerating brain drain, which was there before. I mean, this is the thing. Yeah. All of these trends were visible before October 7th. What October 7th has done is accelerated them to light speed. And just think about it. We talked, of course, remember a few weeks ago, about Intel pulling out of a $25 billion investment in Israel. So I think this is, again, another sign in the sort of loss of confidence and the collapse in the Israeli economy. Recalling, of course, that the high-tech sector, which was there is, or let's say was a high-tech sector in Israel, mostly tied to the military and to Unit 8200, which we just talked about. It was overhyped, but it was there. And it was always sort of the jewel in the crown for Israel. And also the thing that they bragged about most in their propaganda with the phrase startup nation. Oh, look at Israel. It's this jewel in the amid this sea of barbarity, and we have this high-tech sector, and we're solving all these problems. Well, all that has evaporated.
Yeah, it's very satisfying to see the startup nation becoming a shutdown nation, and it reminds me as well of our conversations we've had in the past with the Canadian researcher Michael Bucharit, because he wrote and researched a lot about parallels between South African apartheid and Israeli apartheid. And the South African white supremacist regime used to sort of try and justify itself in the West with these similar kind of justifications, right? Anti-communism was one, but also they tried to say that they were bringing sort of civilization, quote unquote, to Africa in a similar sort of way that Israel claims to be bringing civilization to the West Asia, as if like having some sort of app like Waze or whatever stuff they come up with would justify all their crimes and all the genocide that they're carrying out. But it's very satisfying to see that even that is overblown nonsense, and it's always been overblown. I remember, Ali, you writing about it in one of your books about the sort of claims about green technology and so forth. All the things they've claimed to have invented are often overhyped.
Marketing or failures.
Yeah. Well, there is also another interesting piece, again in Haaretz, the Tel Aviv Daily. This one was an op-ed by Major General 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 talking about how Israel, he estimates, has 1 year left if this war continues, especially if it expands. But more on this, the strategy of attrition. Ali, you read it. I know, John, you read it too. What do people think about this one?
Yeah, let's just, we should also share a couple of paragraphs from this because it's so striking. So again, this is actually sort of an op-ed by Major General 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who is the reserve general, a well-known figure in Israel. And he says that most of the pretentious declarations made by Defense Minister Yoav Gallant throughout the war in Gaza have proven to be groundless. After the occupation of Gaza City, he said that Israel was in total control of the city and its tunnels, and within a short time, Hamas would surrender. After the occupation of Khan Yunis, he claimed that Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar was running in the tunnels by himself and had lost control of his men, and within a few days he would be caught. With these pronouncements, Gallant, along with his colleague, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has been throwing dust in the eyes of the Israeli public. So that's one excerpt I wanted to share, where he's just completely dismissing their claims of any military success, but then he links it to what's happening within Israeli society. And so these paragraphs are really telling. He says, Israel is sinking deeper into the Gazan mud, losing more and more soldiers as they get killed or wounded, without any chance of achieving the war's main goal, bringing down Hamas. The country really is galloping towards the edge of an abyss. If the war of attrition against Hamas and Hezbollah continues, Israel will collapse within no more than a year. Terror attacks are intensifying in the West Bank and inside the country. The reservist army is voting with its feet following recurring mobilizations of combat soldiers, and the economy is crashing. Israel has also become a pariah state, prompting economic boycotts and an embargo on arms shipments. And just again, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 is a major general in was a major general in the Armored Corps, and was the commander of the IDF military colleges. So this is a very senior general who is making these prognostications.
Yeah, he's not like an anti-Zion, like he's not a peaceful anti-war guy.
No, his role as military ombudsman for the IDF was to deal with preparedness. So he dealt with military preparedness for a decade, and he boasts about how, in other interviews, about how $1 billion was spent on his research. He's researched 1,600 fighting units, and just so this preparedness thing isn't coming from. He's been saying this for a long time that they're not prepared. But yeah, he's not a bleeding heart. His goal for the war on Gaza was to delay the ground invasion, to continue to starve the population, cut them off. That was his strategy for Gaza. And he's worried. The things that he's worried about in the West Bank are interesting, because he's worried about the West Bank taking up a strategy like Gaza did during the Second Intifada, where the fighters with all these IEDs, that they decide to turn from defending their villages with the IEDs to turn them on the settlements and make the settlements require significant security forces to protect them. And that they just don't have in their society the ability to raise that many troops. And he's very down on the ability to fight a war with Hezbollah in any form at all. And also, to his resume, he was the commander, the northern commander, the Northern Command chief. So he spent a decade doing that as well. So he knows the North. He knows the fight with Hezbollah. He knows the social dysfunction within his state. He knows that they're a pariah state around the world. And a war of attrition is going to exacerbate all of those aspects.
Yeah, he's part of the security establishment, right? He's part of the security intelligence establishment as opposed to the Netanyahu political establishment, and the former is, surprisingly fairly often against the latter. And I found this article interesting because we've been seeing, a series of similar predictions for a while now, right? And it again, it reminds me of another thing in one of your books, Ali. Like you wrote many years ago about how people didn't expect the collapse of South African apartheid to come as quickly as it did. And when it did happen, it happened very, very quickly. People, the architects of apartheid probably thought it would last forever. But when these things accelerate, it can come very quickly. And this is, what we're going to see, I think. I can't say if it's going to be today, tomorrow, or whenever. But when the collapse happens, I think it will happen very quickly. And again, this is something that Israeli planners have been saying for a long time. Again, going back to the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Institute 15 years ago or more, they were saying in their PowerPoint, this Israeli think tank, influential Israeli think tank, talking about the collapse of Israel's alleged legitimacy in the international arena. They were explicitly comparing themselves to South Africa at the time, saying, well, if we don't shore up our legitimacy in the international fora, we could collapse sooner than we think. So these are not unrealistic assessments by any stretch.
Yeah,
those are really good points, Asa. And what strikes me is that we've heard Ilan Pappé say something similar. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah says something similar. We say something similar. And here's General 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 saying something similar. But none of us have dared to be as, he wouldn't put it this way, I would. None of us have dared to be as optimistic as 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞. Even as Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah says, Israel, it's going to collapse. But he says, I don't say it's going to be in 5 years or 10 years, or he says this is its fate. That's the direction it's going, but we have to be patient. To have a senior Israeli general saying, look, we've got a year, I mean, that may be hyperbole because he's trying to shock Israeli society out of what he sees as its complacency. But on the other hand, to say such a thing when Israel is a country is not exactly like a bank. If we think about a bank run, when rumors go out that, this bank is a bit dodgy and it might fail, everyone runs to pull out their deposits and the bank fails. A country is more complicated than a bank because people live there, their lives are there, and so on. But, Israel there is a similar loss of confidence going on. And that type of loss of confidence can reach a point where it's unstoppable, where if you think about the tech workers now, for example, who wouldn't be trying to get out of Israel, get a job in the EU or in the United States or in Canada or somewhere else? If you look at how often flights to Israel are canceled and for how long, all the major airlines are canceling flights into September now. And so if you're in Israel and you're thinking, well, I want to get out of here, maybe I won't be able to because you can't go by land. Where are you going to go? You can't go north to Lebanon. You're not going to go to Jordan. I mean, there are some people in Jordan who might welcome you, but not the majority of the population. You can't, you're not going to go through to Sinai. The only escape is by air. So when you start to see that even the air links, which you've taken for granted, that, you can just jump on a plane, from Tel Aviv to anywhere in the world, when that is no longer true, and you might have to wait weeks to get a flight, or flights may be canceled or booked up months into the future, then that collapse may accelerate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we will obviously keep watching that very closely. I wanted to bring up, we mentioned it during the live stream. I'm sure in next week's news report, there will be more on the massive military operations that Israel is conducting inside the occupied West Bank. But Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister and extremist settler, is now once again talking about building the third Jewish temple on top of Haram al-Sharif, the Dome of the Rock, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Again, this is not a new plan. Israelis have been talking about this for decades. I remember reporting here on the Electronic Intifada about the settler movement that has been trying to dig underneath the Dome of the Rock in order to destabilize the foundation, and then it all collapsed. Like, this is their crazy extremist messianic fantasy. But Ali, you wanted to talk about the significance of Ben-Gvir's statement this past week that that this is now in process.
Yeah, he wants to build a temple on the Haram al-Sharif, the site where the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque stand. And we've been reporting on this for a decade, even more, that there is this so-called temple movement in Israel, which comes from the settler right, the Ben-Gvir types, where their goal is the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and its replacement with the Jewish temple, this messianic view. I don't know if we can zoom in. That's an article we wrote. Can we zoom in on that picture of the so-called temple, Tamara? I wonder if we can zoom in. But what that's showing, this was just an example of the many stories we've done. Actually, we have an article about the temple movement by Ilan Pape, which I think is from 2016. So again, quite a few years ago. But this was illustrated in 2017 on an app which this temple movement had created. So you could imagine what Jerusalem looks like after the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa have been demolished and replaced with the Jewish temple. And the temple movement has created detailed construction plans for the destruction of Al-Aqsa and the construction of a temple. And it was easy for some people to dismiss this and say, oh, this is very fringe. Even in Israel, it's fringe. But it's not fringe anymore. It's the government. This is now the government, the temple movement. And the danger is real. And the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock is explicitly their goal. And it's just striking and shocking to me how complacent people have been. And this is a goal that is now openly supported by senior members of the government, by, it's become mainstream for a large part of Israel. And the danger of this is truly something that I think is not well appreciated in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, and the world more broadly. And so the danger we're dealing with here is real. And I've made a comparison with what happened in, with the Hindutva movement destroying the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya in India, which was sort of this Hindu nationalist mission to destroy that mosque and replace it with a temple. And the strife and violence and communitarian violence that provoked to this day in terms of, what it means in India. But you take the Dome of the Rock, which is, what Muslims call the first Qibla, the first direction of prayer, and the third holiest site in Islam. And so you multiply the Babri Masjid by a million to sort of understand what this means. I don't know. I don't want to sort of compare things that are holy to people are holy to people. You can't sort of put a value on it. But I'm saying in terms of its global significance is even greater. And I think people are just asleep to the danger here.
Yeah, I'm also reminded of ISIS and the destruction of holy sites around the region, fully supported, of course, armed and funded by the Pentagon. It's going to be. I don't know. I don't know what to say about the this kind of steady stream of real psychopathic or sociopathic, messianic right-wing extremism at the highest levels, and what that means as this genocide in Gaza continues, but.
And that what's emboldening them? I mean, this is the thing that is so dangerous. They're being emboldened by the global passivity to the genocide in Gaza. They've gotten by for so long, for more than a year, doing this just committing this genocide in Gaza. They have, of course, for the last 11 months been very violent in the West Bank, ramped up ethnic cleansing, killing of Palestinians, but now they're doing so even more because they know they can, they feel confident they can get away with it. And you had Israel Katz, the Israeli foreign minister, who said yesterday that what we should do in the north of the West Bank is what we're doing in Gaza, expel the population from vast areas. So they are now, they're getting there. And if they are not stopped in every way we can stop them, it will happen. The danger is extremely real. We just have to hope they collapse, that Isaac Breck is right, before they can implement their plans for the West Bank, because otherwise what we see in Gaza will be their model for the rest of the Palestinian people.
That's right.
It's worth mentioning that Nora and myself did an interview with David Sheen on the topic of how we got here in terms of the Kahanist movement, the ultra-right followers of the Brooklyn Israeli rabbi. He was a settler from Brooklyn, New York. There's a whole history of how these extremists came into the Israeli government. We talked through that in an episode of the podcast with David Sheen, who's done a lot of reporting on the what he calls the Templar movement, the movement for the so-called Third Temple. That we did a good interview with. We had a good conversation with David Sheen about
and not just how it's confined to these extremist circles within Israel. Israeli society, but how it's also very much enmeshed with the Democratic Party and the Democratic Party elite here in this country, and what that means in terms of the fate of the U.S. empire and its pet project, which is the settler colony of Israel. So it's really an interesting, important conversation. We recorded that, I believe it was like October 5th or something of last year.
October 4th. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So we had to push it, but it's out now, and I think you just did the transcription.
Yeah, there's a full transcript. There's video and audio versions, so people can check that out. I think it's still on the front page.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks, Asa. All right. Well, let's have a look at the front page. The electronicintifada.net. Again, we have so many fantastic, important features by our contributors in Gaza. That's the David Sheen interview that we did, how the ultra-right Kahanists infiltrated the U.S. Democratic Party. You can search for that under the podcast tab on the front page. But yeah, this week we have there's our colleague Michael Brown's blog post on the Democratic Party in terms of its stance toward Palestinians in this country and in Palestine. Ali, what were some stories that stuck out to you this week that we published on EI?
Well, we have been picking up the pace again. Not that we really have slowed down that much, but we were just taking extra breaths during August, let's say. And yeah, I just want to point out for people who'll be looking for it, there is the unpublished genocide diaries of Rifat Alareer on the front page that we read from earlier. Yeah. So it's so moving. It was really, I have to say, when I first read those pieces, I could hear Rifat's voice in my head, and it was just very difficult and also very, very, I felt his presence, let me say, and it meant a lot. And I know that people, it's just been unbelievable since we published that just less than a week ago. That one piece has gone really viral, which I think is a sign of how much Rifat's work and words and life continue to touch people. So that is something really to sit with and share and read. And I want to mention Tamara's piece, which you can see there on the right hand side, about again the accelerating theft of land in the West Bank and the construction of Israel's plans to build a colony in Batir, which is my family's village, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So again, we'll have to keep our eye on all these things. There is so much happening on every front.
Yeah, there really is. Well, as we always say, go to the electronicintifada.net, click on the Get Updates link, sign up for our email list, and also go to our YouTube page. You can subscribe to our channel so you'll get notified when we have a new live stream or when we have published a standalone episode. And I just want to say thank you to Maureen Clare Murphy, our senior editor, for pre-production and writing, to Ellie Gerzon for video production and social media. Thanks, Ellie. Of course, Tamara Nassar for her incredible brilliance and production and direction of this live stream and the podcast in general. Everybody at EI, Ali, Asa, John, thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week.